Good morning, everyone. Seeing that most CPAG members are now present, will you please call the roll to establish a quorum?
Yes, I will, and good morning, everyone. Melanie Green.
Here.
Judy Flores.
Here.
Ronald Anaya.
Here.
Bootsy Battle Holt. Diane Grotjohn. Sharina Small. Janelle Woodward. Mia Cooper.
Here.
Roddy Boonchoy.
Good morning. Here.
Shilonine Cruz Gonzalez.
Here.
Babatunde Ilori.
Here.
Gabriela Tavitian.
Good morning.
Amy Nguyen Hernandez.
Here.
Todd Collins.
Here.
Kelly Crossan.
Here. Morning.
Malco.
Here. Good morning.
Morning. I hereby call the February 2023 meeting of the California Practitioners Advisory Group to order at 9:03 a.m. I'd like to commence by saluting the flag. Excuse me, Kelsey, we do.
Can we get a flag on screen in the boardroom?
It's up.
All right, thank you for the flag. Melanie, may I turn it back to you for the flag salute?
Yes, that's perfect. And do we have a quorum, Will?
Yes,
we do have a quorum, correct?
Yes, we do have a quorum.
All right, perfect. Ready, salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Thank you so much, Will. We're going to go into general announcements. We are going to start, and just to reiterate what Will said, we called the meeting to order at, I think, 9:02, Will said. We're going to start the day with the swearing in of our new CPAG members. I will administer the oath of office, and we will do this as one group. New CPAG members, please raise your right hand and repeat after me. And just to let you know, in the beginning, it's going to say I, and then you state your name. So the beginning is always a little clunky, okay? So make sure you're unmuted, okay? Repeat after me. I, please state your name, do solemnly swear.
I, Samara Falco, do solemnly swear
that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States.
That I will support
and defend the Constitution of the United States
against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
Against all enemies, foreign and domestic.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California.
That I will bear true faith and allegiance to the Constitution of the United States and the Constitution of the State of California.
That I take this obligation freely.
That I take this obligation freely.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
Without any mental reservation or purpose of evasion.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I am about to enter.
And that I will well and faithfully discharge the duties upon which I'm about to enter.
Thank you so much. Congratulations. I now would like to allow each new member to introduce themselves and share a little bit about themselves. So we got to hear them in chorus, and now we can hear just a little bit about each one. So Judy, I'd love to start with you. Go ahead.
All right. Thank you, Melanie. My name is Judy Flores. I began teaching in Hayward Unified in 1985. And after teaching there for 5 years, my husband and I relocated to Shasta County, where I spent 17 years in the largest K-8 district here in the county in a variety of different leadership positions. I came to the Shasta County Office of Education and spent 10 years as the Assistant Superintendent of Instructional Services, and I'm now in my 6th year as the Superintendent of Schools. I have 3 grown children and a granddaughter on the way. So there's a little bit.
Thank you so much, Judy. We are so excited to have your leadership on the board. And next, I would love to have Kelsey take a second to introduce yourself.
Good morning. I'm Kelsey Krausen. I'm a senior manager at WestEd. I'm a qualitative researcher. I got my PhD at UC Davis. And my first job out of undergrad was with the Oakland Unified School District, which is where I grew up and attended public schools. And now my own kids attend school there. So I'm thrilled to be joining CPAG.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. Excited to have you on the on CPAG. Excited for your leadership as well. Samara, take it away. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thank you, Melanie, and thank you to the board. I'm Samara Palco. I am currently the Director of Education for the California Catholic Conference, so I support our 12 Catholic superintendents and dioceses of California. But previously, I served as a public school teacher and administrator in Clovis Unified, Lafayette Unified, and Folsom Unified. So I'm just excited to bring that collaboration between public school and our private schools. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Samara. Welcome to CPAG. Excited for your leadership as well. We are so grateful to have our 3 new members, and we also want to have a huge thank you to Ed Manansala and Jesse Levin, whose terms of CPAG finished at the end of 2022. Both were incredible leaders and offered great insight and questions throughout all our meetings. So just want to extend a thank you on behalf of myself and all of CPAG to both of them. So a little bit of logistics. We will take up item 2 out of order so that we can approve the minutes from August 2022. And for public input on this item, member of the public wishing to call in for public comment should view the live stream of the meeting to know at what time public comment will occur for each item. Public comment can be provided during the meeting by dialing the phone number and access code listed on the screen during each item. The operator will notify callers when it's their turn to provide public comment. Public comment will be limited to 1 minute. Please turn down the speaker volume of your computers if you're following the live webcast to avoid an echoing effect. Item 3 is a general public comment item during which members of the public may provide comment on matters that are not specifically listed on the CPAG agenda. A few reminders for our CPAG members. Please mute your microphones when not speaking and keep your cameras on to ensure that we maintain a quorum throughout today's virtual meeting. Please use the raise hand feature using the Zoom participant window if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment. So I will keep track as you raise your hand and then call on folks so that everyone has a chance to speak. If for some reason I miss you or call out of order, feel free to let me know. I try to do my best to follow them as I see them. As a reminder, the chat function should not be used by CPAG members unless you're in need of technical assistance with Zoom. It's a violation of Bagley Keene to use the chat function to discuss the meeting. So now we will take up item 2 to approve the minutes from the August 2022 CPAG meeting. CPAG members, you were provided the link to the draft minutes that are posted on the CPAG website. I'll give everyone a few minutes to review those minutes. We will now open the phone line for the public comment queue. Members of the public wishing to provide comment on this item may do so by calling the number on the slide. You will be notified when it is your time to speak. We encourage you to please state your name and affiliation for the record. And please remember to turn down the speaker volume of your computers if you're following the live feed. It's like when you used to call into the radio when you were younger. You got to turn down the volume so that there's no feedback. Speakers will be limited to 1 minute each. I mean, folks could still call into the radio. It doesn't have to be when you're younger. I'll give folks a second to see if there's any callers.
We're going to give it about 30 more seconds.
Great. Okay, Sarah, do you think it's safe to move on?
No public comments for this item.
Thank you. So now we'll move to CPAG discussion. Is there any discussion on this item? Okay, seeing none. CPAG member, oh, I'm sorry. Okay, seeing no discussion, do I have a motion to approve this item? You can just come off mute and say, I move to approve this item.
I move to approve this item.
Thank you, Ron. I have a motion by Ron. Do I have a second?
I second.
Thank you. Sorry, who was that?
Babatunde.
Thank you. Babatunde, I have a second. Now we have a roll call vote. New members and members who were absent in August, please make sure that you abstain from voting. And I will pass it to Will for the roll call vote.
All right, thank you, Melanie. Melanie Green,
Yes.
Judy Flores,
Abstain?
Ronald Anaya,
Aye.
Bootsy Battle Holt, Diane Grotjohn, Tarina Small, Janelle Woodward,
Yes, aye.
Mia Cooper,
Yes.
Roddy Boontroy,
Aye.
Shilonine Cruz Gonzalez,
Aye.
Babatunde Ilori,
Aye.
Gabriella Tavidian,
I abstain.
Amy Nguyen Hernandez,
Aye.
Todd Collins,
Yes.
Kelsey Krausen,
Abstain.
Samara Palco.
Abstain.
Thank you. The motion carries.
Thank you so much, Will. And now on to agenda item number 1. It's an informational item, one of our favorites, related to the California State and Federal Accountability System, review of the 2022 California School Dashboard, and the 2023 Accountability Work Plan. This item will be presented by Cindy Cazanes and Kimberly Mudheng from the Analysis, Measurement, and Accountability Reporting Division in the California Department of Education. Very excited. For CPAG members, just to let you know, we will take a pause after each section for clarifying questions. So we have a lot of information, so we'll chunk it for clarifying questions, but at the end of the entire item, we would then go to public comment. Okay. So Cindy and Kimberly, I will throw it to you. Take it away.
Thank you, Chair Green. It's nice to see everyone and welcome to the new members of the California Practitioners Advisory Group. I'm Cindy Cazanes. I am the Director for the Analysis, Measurement, and Accountability Reporting Division, and I oversee the California School Dashboard and our data reporting for California. Today, we are going to provide you an overview of what 2022 outcomes look like on the dashboard, especially to make sure that all of our new members and those that may have forgotten since you last met in August of 2022, what you worked on this past year and how it impacted the dashboard. We will then just move over to my agenda piece. We'll then look at revisions under consideration for the 2023 dashboard. As Chair Green mentioned, this is a long presentation, and happy to take breaks for clarifying questions where it seems natural, and then defer to Chair Green if we need to take a physical break at some point during this as well. So we are today seeking feedback. Part of the purpose of the California Practitioners Advisory Group, of course, is to comment on things related to federal Title I pieces of our accountability system. And so we will be seeking your feedback throughout the presentation. And I think it's also just helpful to put things into context. This is our first year of student outcomes when we're looking at an overview of the dashboard since COVID. We had a pause for 2 years, and things do absolutely look different than we ever imagined in 2019. And so we are going to see, we're going to dig into a couple of the indicators a little bit deeper than others. And I will also talk about the impact on our state's accountability support system of support piece, as well as just touch on briefly the Every Student Succeeds Act eligibility for schools. So just to make sure we're all on the same page, the purpose of the California School Dashboard is to make sure that parents and educators have access to meaningful information on our schools and our districts and the progress that they're making towards helping our students and as well as making sure that they can participate in decisions to improve student learning. So this is one piece of our system of our accountability system, which also includes a planning process with a local control accountability plan. And so there's a lot of pieces of this that go into it, but the dashboard really drives, it's intended to drive a lot of meaningful conversations within a community and within a school and district site. I also just wanted to briefly introduce you to something we don't talk about very often at CPAG, but which is also very meaningful, and it's something that the department has actually really hosted for the last 20 years, which is DataQuest. And DataQuest doesn't have an accountability lens in the big A sense. It's a little a accountability. So by making information publicly available, we are able to hold not only schools and districts, but ourselves accountable for how students are progressing through our system, whether or not they're graduating in a timely manner. And so DataQuest really is meant to provide not only data and statistics about our educational system, but is meant to also provide some comparisons. So DataQuest is a place where you can look very quickly at school, district, county, and state levels, but it doesn't provide a meaning behind it in the sense that the dashboard does, right? In the dashboard, we assign, for example, for this year, status levels, and then next year we'll have performance levels with colors. The DataQuest is simply meant to provide raw information. So how did we do this year? And what are we looking at? So specifically as a reminder, we were not able to produce colors because of legislation that was passed, which was AB 130, that prohibited the department from looking at pre-2022 outcomes. So we were only allowed to use what we call status only. And in doing that, we really rebranded the dashboard for this one year, this hybrid year, in that anything you're going to see has purple. You're not going to see the rainbow colors that we're all used to. And that's deliberate because it's meant to be really a standalone look at status only, knowing that in future years we can come back and bring on performance levels. You can also see that we have, instead of, again, the rainbow dial, like you can see on my screen, we have cell phone bars. And so really one cell phone bar looking at it, very weak signal, very low student progress, to the top, which would be 5 cell phone bars, which is high performance from our students in whatever indicator we're looking at. And so on this screen, you also see different language for the suspension rates, because we're, of course, on the very low end, looking at very high and high, as opposed to if we were looking at English language arts, it would be the reverse. So it's just, thinking about, we want to have low chronic absenteeism. We want to have high performance in mathematics and English language arts. So this is the state summary for the dashboard for 2022. You can see for chronic absenteeism statewide, we're at very high. For suspension, we're at medium. English language arts at medium. Graduation rate at medium. We are not able to produce a college career indicator because of limited statewide testing for those graduating seniors in 2021 when they were juniors. We will return that measure next year for status, and then in the following year, we can add performance colors. And then for the final two, for English language arts and mathematics, the state overall was at a low. I want to spend just a bit of time talking about chronic absenteeism. This is absolutely the single highest area of focus, simply because of the staggering rates that we saw statewide. And it is a focus of the state superintendent as well. So Superintendent Thurman has has hosted a webinar this past month and brought on educators from Long Beach and the Northern California area to talk about how they're trying to approach this very challenging issue of getting students to school in the time of post-pandemic. So just to provide a little bit of background on the business rules related to the chronic absenteeism rate, we're looking at the percentage of students who are chronically absent. That is, they missed 10% or more of days expected. It includes students expected to attend at least 31 days. And finally, it's dependent on attendance data submitted by LEAs in the California Longitudinal Pupil Achievement Data System once a year. Districts, of course, and schools track attendance on a daily basis. The information that is submitted to CalPADS at the end of the year simply tells us how many days they were there and how many days they were expected to be there. So keep in mind the richness at the local level for local educational agencies about a student, whether or not Cindy Jr. was here, missed every Monday, or perhaps, I like to take Fridays off. Hopefully that's not the case. That depth of information resides at the school and the district level. That is not something that the state is able to collect. So this is a nice side-by-side comparison because the dashboard is an indicator only for grades K through 8. And that is because the state board sees the graduation rate as the companion for 9 through 12. So for grades K through 8 on the dashboard, just keep in mind that population is, it's not the full K-12 population. We see that though on DataQuest. And I want to just mention some of the power of the DataQuest filters. You can look at it by kindergarten. You can look at it by 1 through 3. You can look at it by different grade spans. So you can really see targeted differences between our students at schools and districts. So for example, our kindergartners were the most chronically absent last year. We tend to see our 9 through 12 as that second group of chronically absent, and that did follow through. But the 10 through 12th, or the 9 through 12th graders were closer to the state average than kindergartners were, for example, because they were about 10 percentage points above the state rate. So over 40% of kindergartners were chronically absent. Also, just a nuance, the dashboard does not look at non-public schools in the sense that they're standalone. We look at them as included in the LEA report. We also have a different filter for charter schools. And then finally, the dashboard did implement for the first time this year students with disabilities. They're attributed to their district of residence. So we call that the district of residence rule. They get sent back for district level reports, but for school, they stay with wherever they're being served. So as the leading indicator for the eligibility of differentiated assistance, which we're going to get into, chronic absenteeism, as I mentioned, was at an all-time high. And this was true for states across the nation. We are not unique in the percentages that we're reporting, and organizations like Attendance Works, led by Hetty Chan, really has, I think, really shown a light on some of the other states and just the enormity of this issue. So you can see at a glance from what we call the baseball card on the left-hand side of the screen that not only were 30% of our students chronically absent, but then in the equity report, we can dig in and we can start to look at student groups in each level. So the majority of our 13 student groups, 11, were at very high, and we had 2 at high. No student group showed up at the state level in medium, low, or very low. And you can really dig into this information in the memo that we've provided to the board. And I'm going to talk about that in just a moment. But I just wanted to give you an overview of what you can find on the dashboard for this figure. And then, of course, on that right-hand side, this is what you dig into when you click on View More Details. So this screen is the landing spot for that second look. And we can see, again, that the state numbers of students, 4 million students, is representative of our K through 8. If we were looking at our K through 12 population, that number would be closer to 6 million students. So once you're on that second screen, you can dig into those student groups. You can see who's in the very high. You can see who's in the high, and there's a lot of depth of information there. This report is taken from DataQuest and provides you a multi-year look at chronic absenteeism. So just at a glance, we see starting in 2016-17 that we had 10.8% of our students included in the chronic, being designated as chronic absenteeism. That gradually increased over the years from 2017-18 up to 11%, 11.1, 2018-19 at 12.1. And in the 2019-20 school year, we were not able to report that information. We can talk about that in just a moment. And then finally, the first post-COVID year, or rather still COVID year of 2020-2021, we were at 14.3%. And then this year, of course, just being that those large, really staggering figures of 30%. So just some observations around that data and why it's important to have this context. Those first couple of years of data collection, where we really, when we collect new data, those in the first initial years, we always are focused on data quality. It's something that's new for districts. It's not something that's automatically put in accurate. We try to make sure we have appropriate validations and pieces in there that make sure that we get appropriate data. That said, we did get a large district or two that told us that there were no students that were chronically absent, which is incredible. In fact, we had that this year as well. And so for us, that means that we need to make sure that we have checks in the system, that if a student was suspended, of course, they're still considered, they can be considered chronically absent. That goes towards an absence. The student was not being provided an opportunity to learn. So keeping in mind those first couple of years, those first 3 years, 2016-17, 2017-18, 2018-19 were focused on data quality. Moving into the 19-20 year, as I mentioned, we were not able to report out on that. And that was because we were not able to determine that the data were valid or reliable. And so there was legislation that was passed that allowed us to provide that lens and not report out on this information. Of course, this was due to the fact that schools closed in late February, early March. By St. Patrick's Day, we were all gone out of our offices. And so the physical closure and the collection of data beyond those dates were not consistent statewide. And so that was part of the reason we were not able to report on that information. And then, of course, thinking about this 2021 academic year, the quarantine requirements varied. And most students didn't have access. Really, our students under certain ages didn't have access to the vaccine until the Thanksgiving period. And so, thinking about that statewide, certain areas had the virus present more so than other areas. We definitely see that in the data, but we don't. As you can see from those statewide numbers, this affected every region of the state. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing this screen and I'm going to move into a live demonstration of the dashboard. I would like to show just a couple of other indicators, and it's always a little bit more fun to do that when you're on the live site, because this dashboard is just such a dynamic opportunity to look at information. So let me just reshare my screen and I'm going to switch over to my preset pages. Just want to check, Melanie, that you can see my screen and you're seeing Ventura Unified.
Yes, looks great, Cindy.
Thank you. So Ventura Unified, of course, just north of Los Angeles County, on the coast, serving a diverse group of students, English learners, just a variety of student backgrounds, is a great representative because it's small enough that we can dig into some of the indicators. So I pulled them up because I wanted to show first. Just want to get my notes here. First, I want to show the graduation rate. The other reason that the Ventura Unified is nice is because it's a unified district, and so we can also bounce between the academic indicators for high school, and then we'll come back to the ones for elementary. So we're going to look at graduation rate. I'm going to go into the academic indicator, and then we're going to look at additional reports. So I have sort of 3 stops I'm going to make today. So graduation rate here, the district was high. And really, when we come down to this baseball card, we can see that they were at 92%. So how did that vary between the state? We can just do that with a click toggle that the state was 87.4% at a medium. So the district beat the state average rather. You can also see the equity report changes when we do that toggle. So the state's equity shows that 1 student group was in the very low, 5 were in the low, 4 were in the medium, 1 was in the high, and 2 were in the very high. But for the district, we see a little bit of a different focus. We see that none were in the very low, none were in the low, majority were in the medium, 2 were in the high, and 1 was in the very high. So what does this mean? Let's go into view more details. And it pops me down. It's taken me through this lens of what we were seeing for the chronic absenteeism rate on the slide. Of course, that was a static look. So let's dig into what does this mean. So overall, the number of students that are present in this are 1,300 students and 8 student groups. We already looked over that overview, but what does very low mean? So let's just scroll down to explore groups by performance color. So at the medium level, if I select medium, which is what we're currently on, we see that we're looking at 5 different student groups: English learners, Hispanic, homeless, socioeconomically disadvantaged, and students with disabilities. And you can see at a glance the number and size of that student group for the district. You can see the comparison again with the state. So at a glance, we're looking at 73.3% of English learners graduated in the period they were expected to graduate. And of those that represented for the state English learners, it was 74,000 students. And of course, for this district, it was 180 students. And then we can always toggle over to the other categories as well, with their high being 2 or more races and white, and their very high being Asian. The other thing about the graduation rate, it's a combined rate. So it's not just the 4-year rate. We are looking at students who also were provided an opportunity to stay at the district and be provided supports so that they could get over the bar of having being able to obtain a high school diploma. And so this is the graph that I like to show off. Sometimes it's not represented or we don't talk about it enough, but for this particular district, for their 5-year rate, we see that they had 36 students that were able to, again, graduate within that 5-year period. Those 2 numbers are combined to produce the combined rate. And so, of course, what's different, and we don't see on this screen, is the 1-year DAS rate, which we are working on, but it's not part of performance for the district because of the denial of the waiver from the U.S. Department of Education. So with that, I want to move into academic performance just briefly, and I'm going to focus on English language arts for this district. This district was a low. They were 17.8% points below standard. They had let's look at it compared to the state, which was also a low at 12.2% below standard. So just briefly, or just a bit lower than the state standard. Again, looking at the information we looked at for graduation rate, you can see the student groups here listed, and then you can dig into the student group information. But the one thing that's a little different with the academic indicator is this English learner comparisons. And so this is something the board adopted several years back, and I think is just super powerful. It shows the number of current English learners, their percent or their points either below standard or at standard, they're reclassified, and then they're English only. So we can see just at a glance that reclassified English learners do better than students who are native English speakers and who are current English learners. So reclassified English learners are just such a powerful group, such a strong group of learners, and it really shows with this data point here. So finally, I'm going to move into, I just wanted to highlight the fact that on really any page that you dig into on the dashboard, you can actually click on what says view additional reports. And it has a little arrow pointing up to the right. And what that means is it's going to take you away from the California School Dashboard website. It's going to move you back into the California Department of Education website. Of course, the dashboard is hosted by San Joaquin. We love San Joaquin. We're very happy with CodeStack, Melanie. They do a great job in hosting the website for us. But we also do support really for educators and those that really want to dig in, our research community, and those that are help leading the LCAP process, additional information. So what I've done is I've actually pre-populated a toggle that looks at participation rate. One of the members of CPAG asked me, Cindy, where can I find the participation rate sort of as a standalone? Keep in mind the participation rate is a measure of the accountability system. It's not something that's reported on the CAS website. It's required for accountability because we have to do a penalty if a student group, a school, or a district doesn't achieve 95%. So there's these business rules that have been implemented differently for the first time this year. And for example, for Ventura Unified, we see that there are a couple of different student groups that didn't meet the 95%. So, but it's a range, right? So depending on the number of students that you need to add to get to 95%, the penalty aspect may be not as great. So for example, all students were at 92%, but their English learners were amazing. They went to 95%. The rest of the student groups, as at a glance, I am not seeing at 95% until I get to Filipino, which had 100% tested, and Asian, who was at 96%, and then Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander at 100%. So those other student groups, there was a slight penalty attached, again, to get them up to the 95%. That's called the loss or lowest achievable scale score. We have great flyers on this, but again, just wanted to sort of show off really the breadth of the data that's available. Also at the click of your fingertips, you can dig into data files, also the layouts for those data files. For those of you that are not afraid of Excel and like to really look at things in rank order. So with that, before we move on to LEAs eligible for differentiated assistance, Chair Green, I wanted to stop sharing and just ask if there's any clarifying questions around the results I've shared so far.
Thank you so much, Cindy. I always love when we actually pull up the dashboard and get to go inside. A huge shout out to Ventura for sharing their data with us. I think that was so great how you pointed out their student groups, right? They have all their student groups in those higher achieving levels. So thank you, Ventura, for sharing that. And I will give CPAG members a second. If there's any questions, just go up to your raise the hand feature and I'll just see if there's anybody. If not, we'll keep rolling into some of the more to the next content.
So Melanie, I'm not seeing a raise hand feature on my on your list, but I have a couple questions.
Go ahead, Judy, take it away.
Okay, so Cindy, it's my understanding that since the release of the first dashboard in 2017, we've had a different mix of indicators every year. And that 2022, that would also be true because we're back to status only. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, thank you for that. I just wanted to clarify. So then the other piece around CalPads, you mentioned CalPads in relation to how the chronic absenteeism data is gathered. And we know that across the state, there were several challenges with CalPads last year. Are there safeguards that CDE has put in place to help support our districts and schools with CalPads this year?
Absolutely. And we're going to be communicating with the field very shortly about that as we approach the end of year collection opening in the near future.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you so much, Judy. Okay, seeing no other hands. Is there any CPAG members that have any questions that can't see the hands? All right, Cindy, go ahead, keep on going. And CPAG members, just so you know, we will stop again in just a little bit. So if any questions come to mind as we keep going, just write them down and we'll have a space to ask clarifying questions in just a little bit. Go ahead, Cindy, thank you.
Just double checking again that you can see my screen.
Yes.
Thank you. Great. So now let's move into an area that we've been spending a bit of time digging into, and I know others that are on CPAG members have as well. So now what, right? So we've produced a dashboard, and the dashboard has to be used for two things on the tough side of accountability. identifying or saying which districts and schools are eligible for support. So I'm going to first focus on LEAs eligible for support, and then I want to mention from the get-go that since this presentation was posted, the department has released the Every Student Succeeds Act eligibility determinations for schools, and so I'm going to briefly cover that verbally. So to get us started, the local control funding formula has 3 levels or a 3-tiered system for support. General assistance, which is available to all of our schools. Differentiated assistance is for LEAs that meet certain eligibility criteria for additional support. And intensive intervention LEAs with persistent performance issues over a period of time. I think it's important to mention the purpose of differentiated assistance is intended to help LEAs address underlying causes that led to the eligibility and to strengthen the eligibility or the LEA's ability to evaluate effectiveness of strategies and programs and adjust their inputs or their work to improve student outcomes. So just a point of clarification on that purpose. For 2022, we were, again, limited on the eligibility for districts and county offices. Of course, under LCFF, charter schools are treated as their own local educational agency, or LEA, but based on a statutory requirement for charter schools, it was determined that we were not able to deem any of them eligible for differentiated assistance, and will resume that practice or that review in 2023. Of course, we use the dashboard to make these determinations for differentiated assistance. It's specified under policy that the board has approved as to the criteria. And then, of course, for 2022 only, state indicators were used for differentiated assistance eligibility determinations. In 2023, we'll pick back up with local indicators being a part of the mix. So the 2022 differentiated assistance eligibility criteria was that districts and county offices that have 1 or more student groups that meet the criteria and at least 2 priority eligible areas are eligible for differentiated assistance. These are the priority areas, and you can see on the right-hand side the state indicators that align with the priority areas. So let's walk through them. People achievement, priority 4, we're looking at very low status on both ELA and mathematics academic indicator, or very low status on the English learner progress indicator. For pupil engagement, priority 5, we were looking at very low status on graduation rate indicator or very high status on chronic absenteeism. School climate, very high status on suspension rate. So again, you had to have 1 or more student group that met the criteria in at least 2 priority areas. So for example, graduation rate and English learner progress indicator, those combined with the same student group would allow for a district to become eligible for differentiated assistance. You can see the student groups at the state level and the breakdown by priority area and the combination of priority areas in our memo to the state board from December. And I wanted to mention that it was recently updated, actually just yesterday, so it's hot off the presses. There was a change in application of a business rule that wasn't applied correctly, and we did have about 15 districts, mainly county offices of education, come out of differentiated assistance, and then 4 LEAs fall into differentiated assistance. So in total, we're now at 617 school districts eligible for differentiated assistance in 2022. The top student groups that determined eligibility, the top 3 have been the top 3 for several years running. Students with disabilities, homeless, and foster. And then a new addition in the 4th place was English learners with 230 districts. That is the amount of student groups of English learners that were made part of the determination. I also wanted to mention in this updated memo to the state board, there is also some new information in the data file, specifically LEAs meeting the criteria under 52072 and 52072.1. which is essentially it's required under education code, which I just mentioned, but it's the determination of LEAs who had 3 or more pupil subgroups that met differentiated assistance for multiple times over multiple priorities for 3 out of the 4 years. And so there is a new column in that data file that shows you that about 39 LEAs met that additional criteria. And then just briefly, as I mentioned verbally, I would provide you a brief overview of the Every Student Succeeds Act eligibility requirements. That memo was given to the board originally at the beginning of the month, and then we updated it earlier this week and had some adjustments based on, again, an application of the business rule that we found was inappropriately implemented. So for the Every Student Succeeds Act, similar to differentiated assistance, we are at an all-time high of schools being determined to be eligible for assistance. Specifically for CSI low graduation rate, we had 333 schools be determined. And of course, that's an average over the last 3 years of under 68% of their students graduating. And then for low performing, in which we have to hit a minimum of that 5% threshold of Title I schools, we had 474 schools. For ATSI, we are at an all-time record of 6,209 schools being identified under the methodology. And with ATSI, I think it's really important to mention that the Every Student Succeeds Act does not have a cap. There is no, elimination of a criteria if we hit over a certain number. That isn't provided for under ESSA. The methodology that was used was based on the methodology that the board had adopted under the Every Student Succeeds Act state plan and that the U.S. Department of Education approved. It was adjusted for the 1 year of information only which was limited because of, again, that state law that was passed, AB 130. And again, that addendum had to be approved by the U.S. Department of Education. And so that methodology not only came to you all for approval back, I think, in February, but then also was adopted by the board, and then the U.S. Department of Education needed to adopt it. That said, I mean, the department and I think the board are very worried about the number of schools in this space and the support for those schools, as you can see with this number of 617 out of less than 1,000 school districts for differentiated assistance. So it's something that, again, we'll be digging into. We work with our program colleagues under the direction of William McGee in our Student Achievement and Support Division, who actually do the heavy lifting of supporting schools and districts for both of these measures of accountability. So Melanie, with that information, I think at this point, it's probably best to pause and see if there's any clarifying questions.
Thank you, Cindy. Let me see if there's any questions. And for folks, the raise hand feature might be, depending on what your Zoom looks like, there's 3 little dots and then the word more is underneath it. And then if you click that, you get your like emoji options. But Judy, I know that yours wasn't working. Do you have any questions?
Yeah, I did. So Cindy, I wondered, when we think about, at least in our county, the the LEA's districts not identified for differentiated assistance, all but one of them are very small districts. Mm-hmm. And so I wondered if there was ever any discussion about including very small districts at the all student level rather than student group level when they don't have 30 or more students within a student group.
It's a great question, Judy. That has not come up in the LCFF determination conversation. There is a requirement under the Every Student Succeeds Act that we have a criteria for small schools, but there has not been an equal requirement for our districts that are in differentiated assistance. So of course, we have minimum N sizes for indicators, which is 30 students. We do have some school districts out there, and then maybe they're in your neck of the woods, Judy, that are 6 students, that are 10 students. And so one could say that, one student could, there's a balance there of identification for just one student, but it is not something, at least that I can recall over the last 8 years that's really come up. But it's a good question.
Yeah. The other question, and thank you for that. The other question I had is with all the data that is gathered, and certainly this comes through what you've shared with DataQuest as well. I wonder if the same set of data could be used to identify bright spots within the state. So as we look at those who are in the blue, for specific student groups, for state indicators, is there any ability to provide identification of those bright spots for LEAs that are exceeding expectations with student groups?
I'd love to work with your colleagues, Judy, to identify those. I think you have a much richer, knowledge of what locally, what that is. There are, we do produce the tables that are included in the board memo about how many student groups hit that very high status. Of course, for certain indicators, it was almost non-existent. So I think, yeah, absolutely. But I would do it. I wouldn't do it just with data alone. I'd want to make sure that we had somebody like a trusted source like the county superintendents or the Association of California School Administrators to help us along the way, because it's not a priority, or it's not required in legislation, but I think for you all, it's nice to have modeled folks out there. And, I know that there are GEO leads that get paid to help push and elevate, best practices, as well as the DA leads. And so I guess that would be another place I would start with, is a system of support.
Okay, yeah, we would love the opportunity to get that data and partner with you, because you're right. It's not just about the data, it's about the practices that have been put in place to be able to highlight those. Thank you.
Of course.
Next, we have Kelsey. Go ahead, Kelsey.
Hi, I had a question about the pupil achievement indicators, and I wonder if you could speak to the decision around using both ELA and math together rather than either or, and any modeling that's been done if they were separate. So you could meet the indicator eligibility for one or the other, not both. Not sure if that question makes sense.
It makes sense. So the academic indicator, and maybe it'd be helpful, Kelsey, if I go back to that slide, because I think it just stands out very clearly. It's been like 4 or 5 years since the board made this decision. So I'm going to call a friend and ask him if she can help remember how that conversation went and what kind of modeling the team did.
I can. And specifically, so that criterion for being very low for both ELA and math, and only very low, is actually an anomaly, right, within the differentiated assistance criteria for this status only year. And in normal years, that actual criterion is red on both, or red on one and orange in the other. So it's a combination of low performance across both of those two indicators for academic. As for it being separated out completely, that was not under consideration when the original criteria were gone through. It was always within combination, and it was that determination of 2 reds or red and orange across the 2 that would create that, and not per se orange or red only in one. However, this is at the LEA level. As Cindy mentioned, around the federal designations for CSI and ATSI, each of those indicators for school level are considered individually. So those are looked at wholly and separately as what your performance is on those indicators individually. So if that helps.
Thanks, Kim.
Okay, with that, Cindy, I think we are ready to keep moving. Thank you so much.
Okay, well, I am just...
Sorry, I had a question. I couldn't figure out that raise hand feature.
No problem. Go ahead, Bob Tunde. Yeah, okay. Go ahead.
My question, Cindy, thank you for the presentation. My question was more around if there was any look at potentially the cut points, and maybe this is what you're going to be going into the next part of your presentation. But one of the things I was just looking at in the MOU that was shared is by student group. And when we were looking at our emergent multilingual students or our English learner students, the percent of them in the very low category, the lowest result for mathematics and ELA are significantly higher than when we're looking at the English learner progress indicator specifically. And so, for example, some numbers I was just looking at, approximately 49% of English learners were considered very low in mathematics and 40% in ELA for all the districts that have an N size of 30 or more. And then when we look at the English learner progress indicator, it was only 4.3% that are very low. So it's just like a huge difference. So I was looking at the cut points for the English learner progress indicator to get you in very low all the way to very high. And the cut point is 65% or higher for very high. And then if you're below 35%, you're considered very low. And so I was just thinking, does the cut points, is that something that may be relooked at because of that? There's huge wide differences in results. And the English learner progress indicator is right now the only indicator that's looking at the same student over time. And if they're meeting, their expected growth.
Yeah, so we are going to talk about cut scores for that particular indicator in the next section. So it's a bit premature, but I did move back to this slide because I wanted to emphasize that whether it was English learner progress or the academic indicator, if that student group is in the very low, as you mentioned, on the cut scores for mathematics and English language arts, that's why we see English learners being such a heavy need of a student group, why districts were identified for assistance is really, it did trigger because of the academic indicator. But we will be talking about specific cut scores. And of course, these are two very different assessments. The purpose of those assessments are different, but we're going to talk about that in the next section.
Thank you.
All right, I think with that, we are ready to keep going. Go ahead, Cindy.
Of course. So the last piece before I turn it over to Kim is around the dashboard toolkit, and more just a shout out and a huge thank you to the field who helped us to launch this early, and we were able to get out information really the earliest that we could, which was back in August when you all met. We were able to take a tour of it, but I wanted to let you know it did evolve and has a lot of, I think, great resources on it. A lot of the parent flyers have been translated into our top, I believe, 7 languages. And so just wanted to do a shout out if you're wondering, if you have a wondering about why something is in an easy to read format, the toolkit's a good starter. We, of course, for those super users or those researchers like Kelsey and others, we do have our technical mini guides available as well through the dashboard toolkit. So information on how indicators exist, business rules that apply, as well as all of the data files are publicly available through, you can get to them through the dashboard toolkit. So really, if you were to do California dashboard toolkit on Google, I think we're now nearing the top search. I don't have the most recent numbers, but when we were looking at our stats back in November for the toolkit, we were seeing tens of thousands of individuals accessing the toolkit. And so I think that shows that it's met a need. We still continue to get questions, so we're still, making tweaks to things to make sure that we have improved information out there. But just wanted to highlight again resources that are available to the field to really dig into the dashboard. And with that, I am just going to walk through just a couple more reports that are on our to-do list. These reports are not required or don't go into the calculations that determine districts eligible for differentiated assistance or schools eligible for support under the Every Student Succeeds Act. But they really help, I think, districts and schools, such as our alternative school space, just get a better picture, not only of their performance, but statewide comparisons. And so on our to-do list is the DAS one-year graduation rate, and then an additional reports. We know this has been helpful for those that are working on the planning process as well, is the student group report, the college measures report, and then the district and charter school performance by county. I anticipate those to be coming out in spring. We have had quite a workload on our shoulders in just trying to get out those eligibility determinations. And so this is what we're really turning to next. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Kim, and she is going to talk to you about the revisions under consideration for the 2023 California School Dashboard.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Cindy, for all of the getting us in the mindset, right? It's the middle of February, 2022. Obviously, with all of the support determinations and everything else is still very present in our mind. But we are moving forward and looking through what the work plan for this year will entail for the 2023 California School Board, and how we will share with you today this work plan, and then I come back to you in August with the results and what we were proposing to share with the State Board. Next slide. So as you may remember, we walked through this review with CPAG. And for those that are new, I will go through the process again, just so that everyone's on the same page. But the California Department of Education is fully committed to continuous improvement within the dashboard and our accountability system. And to the point I believe that Judy made earlier, right, that every dashboard looks a little different and different indicators pop through in there. That's because, if adjustments need to be made and data isn't available and or new data comes online that we can utilize and do, we are fully committed to incorporating that and making our dashboard the best it can be. We want our accountability system to truly reflect what's happening in the field and truly reflect the data that we have available to us. And so this is, a joint commitment by the State Board of Education and CDE to do that. And with that commitment comes obviously a lot of work that really never stops. So prior to the dashboard being published, we are already, working on our work plan for the following year and looking at the changes and possibilities of what's to come, not just for 2023, but also for multiple years in the future. And so today, what we're going to walk through is the work plan for our state and local indicators and performance standards that we present to the State Board in March. And you are getting that preview as CPAG prior to us taking this to the board in March. And then again, we will come back in August to you and then to September State Board meeting and present any action that we would like the State Board to take with regards to the dashboard for implementation either in the current year's dashboard or for dashboard years in the future. And so if there's actions they need to take that would allow us to do work in the future, that would happen then. So that is why today is for information gathering and feedback purposes from all of you to help share how this work plan develops and the work that we do for the rest of the year. Next slide. So without further ado, here is our work plan for 2023. First up is the finality and completion of the English Learner Progress Indicator. And we'll walk you through all of the details and the work that is involved specifically with completing this indicator and all of the work that will come before both the CPAG and State Board in the future. Additionally, we're proposing some updates and revisions to both the graduation rate indicator as well as the college/career indicator. So we'll walk through what that looks like as well. And then we're also going to cover some additional data that we'll be planning to add to the dashboard, specifically with regards to the science assessment results or CAST results that we have. For priority one, we'll be looking at the addition of teacher assignment data. And finally, adding least restrictive environment data to the dashboard, and to look exactly at how we will be doing that and what way we will be doing that. We will also be continuing our work on academic growth that has been in process and progress since 2017, formally with the board. That work will continue until we see our next set of growth results in 2024. And then finally, we'll cover some updated business rules for the 2023 dashboard that we would like to receive board approval on and board direction on as we move forward with the dashboard. So let's get started first with the completion of the English Learner Progress Indicator, or as we affectionately call it, ELPI, and incorporating the ALT LPAC results into the ELPI. So just as a review, and this year, I guess it comes into full clarity. And honestly, I think it's done us a little bit of service in the fact that we had a status-only dashboard. And that has brought clarity to the multiple components of our dashboard that may have been kind of confused and smushed together within our color system. And for those that were there while we built it in 2017, that was a little bit more segmented and clear. However, those that came along may have just seen the colors and not seen all of the pieces that go into it. But each state indicator has 3 distinct components, and we walk through each of those because specifically all of the technical design around each of those is very important. So we have status levels, right, that look at current year performance. And each of those, there are 5 levels of current year performance that range from very high to very low for each of our indicators, with 4 distinct cut scores set based on the distribution of performance by LEAs in a current year. So we look at multiple years of current year status to be able to set those distributions and set those cut scores. Then we have change level cut scores as well, because now we're going to be looking at year-over-year change within each of our indicators, the distribution of that change across all LEAs, and setting for cut scores between increased significantly to decrease significantly, so that we end up with 5 categories there. And then finally, we also have a 5x5 color grid. And for any of you who have looked at all of our color grids together, you will notice that they are all different across each of the indicators, because additional policy considerations and performance considerations come into the placement of colors within that grid. So for example, on our graduation rate indicator, the bottom row for very low is all red. That is a unique feature of the graduation rate indicator. Therefore, making progress, if you are still below 68%, you cannot receive a color other than red on the dashboard. That's an intentional decision that was made. Additionally, some bottom rows with very low have a yellow box in the far right. So if you've increased significantly, you are rewarded with a yellow, even if you have very low status. So that 5x5 color grid comes into play as well as part of the matrix of what we are doing. So just for background on the ELPI, again, because not all of us have been here since 2017, if you click back on the dashboard as when Cindy showed you and you toggle down in the year boxes, if you go back to 2017, you will see colors for the ELPI on the dashboard. And that is because in 2017, we developed the ELPI utilizing CELT test scores. And we had many years of CELT test scores to be able to validate and reliably create an indicator of performance for the ELPI. And look at all of the status cut scores, change cut scores, and 5x5 to develop an indicator. However, very soon after that, we moved to the LPAC. And with a new test designation, we needed to make sure that we were appropriately looking at performance. And specifically, we were not allowed to align CELT and LPAC scores together. We couldn't look at growth across the 2 tests. So with that, on the 2018 dashboard, the State Board of Education approved an LP 3-year plan. And if we can think forward and count 3 years from 2018, we can see that our 3-year plan may have gotten a little disrupted by 2020. However, the 3-year plan was executed in order to say and remain a commitment to the LB and publishing a color for the dashboard as soon as possible. So that year, the state board approved that in 2019, LB would be based on status only and that we would bring to the board, next slide, in 2019, a methodology and cut scores for the LB status that would create and also would create 6 LB levels in order to help with the LPAC. Additionally, in 2019, this utilization of status for the LB really set a foundation that we were able to utilize in the 2022 dashboard. And that was the use of very low status as a proxy for red on the dashboard for LEA and school support determinations. So the research and work that we did foundationally in setting of the status cut scores and utilization of status only honestly set us ahead for 2022 and our ability to do so and pivot quickly based on AB 130. So in 2020 and 2021, with the suspension of accountability based on AB 130 and Senate Bill 98, we did not report out anything on the LB for any sort of status or working through what was being shared. So our last results for the LB prior to the 2022 dashboard were from 2019.
Kim, I thought it would be helpful maybe just to pause to reiterate what you've just said. So, and please jump back in if you feel like I'm not addressing this appropriately, but also to address Babatunde's question around the cut scores. The cut scores similarly for the academic indicator were originally based on data from several years back, pre-COVID data. So what you're seeing for both of these is a 7% distribution on either ends for very low and very high. Performance now is different than when the original cut scores, right? It's not, there's not a restriction on you have to have 7% for the entire duration of the life of the indicator. So the LP cut scores are showing, I think to your point, it's not reaching that full potential of where the original cut scores were set for status. Whereas on the opposite end for academic, we are seeing an overwhelming number because this past year, of course, our academic indicators had much lower performance than we did when we originally set those, when the board originally set those cut scores. They actually reset them. And I think, Kim, correct me if I'm wrong, I think it was back in January of 2018. So that's probably the best place to start. And we can definitely, follow up as far as the direction of providing you that background because it's been a long time. And I think folks have, rightfully so, have had some confusion there. So I just wanted to provide that clarification. I know Kim has a couple more slides to go, and then we're happy to take some clarifying questions.
All right. Thank you, Cindy. I really appreciate that. Yep. So, and as we all know, 2019 feels like it was a long, long time ago. So just to review, for the LP state indicator in 2019, the status cuts levels and cut scores were approved for current year performance for very low, very high to very low. And those were utilized again in the 2022 dashboard for measuring English learner progress based on the 2019 cut scores that were set. Performance in 2022 was measured against those cut scores. And as a friendly reminder, we like to put this out constantly, and amazing consultant in our office, Justin Lane, walks through constantly that the LB is very unique. And I want to make sure when we talk about change that we know what we're talking about. So for status, LB is actually measuring how EL students are moving towards English language proficiency. But unlike every other indicator, we actually need 2 years of data in order to be able to measure that progress, right? So we need to see how you were doing in the prior year to see how you're doing in the current year. So that is actually where AB 130, we were able in trailer bill language to remind the legislature that, hey, actually, we need 1 additional year of data to look at for the LP, or else we're not going to be able to look at it. So please make sure you add that back in. So unlike all the other indicators, we do use 2 years of data to determine LP status. So therefore, the work plan for 2023 is to evaluate change levels and change cut scores so that we will be able to bring to the board for approval the 5 levels of performance from in year-to-year change for increase significantly to decrease significantly. So all of the 5 categories of performance for change, as well as reestablishing the 5x5 color grid and approval of that grid by the state board that would match the colors combinations of status and change to its performance level color of blue, green, yellow, orange, or red. So for change, we are going to be looking at and evaluating the measurement of year-over-year change within the LP. So we actually need 3 years of LPAC summative results to be able to utilize and do that. So our work this year will be to review and analyze multiple years of assessment data to determine what these change scores are. And this work will be done both by the LP work group that we have assembled, our technical design group for technical advice, and CPAG as well for feedback in August. And we will be taking that these suggestions to the state board in September. And then for the 5x5 color grid and reestablishing it, we need obviously multiple years of LPAC summative report assessment results in order to be able to create some sample examples of what a color grid might look like. So we'll be reviewing and analyzing past and current LP data to map the colors. And again, this work will be shared by the LP work group, our technical design group, as well as CPAG for feedback. Now, finally, this is the other part of completing the LP, and that is the incorporation of the alternative LPAC. Now, traditionally, we have only had the regular form LPAC included in the LP. So the alt LPAC was approved by the state board for use in 2019. However, we need for the LP, again, 2 full years of data. And what was wonderful was last year's iteration from the 2021-22 school year of the alternate LPAC was an operational field test. And what that means in the assessment world is essentially that while it was a field test and to look at and gather data and information that field tests do, it's operational, meaning that we can utilize that data. So instead of having to wait an additional year to be able to incorporate the alt LPAC, with this year, 2022-23's operational summative LPAC results, we'll be able to measure progress on those students who took the alternative LPAC. So we will be looking at, next slide, how to incorporate those scores into the LP as well. So that work, again, will be shared by our 3 groups. This availability of the second year of data will really be able to help us see and map how we're going to include that, what it looks like, what levels of performance, et cetera. That is all the work we're about to do and then undertake, but it's just like we've incorporated the California Alternative Assessment into and with our CASP results into both the academic indicators for ELA and math. We're very excited and proud to be able to incorporate the alternative LPAC into the LP results as well. So I think this is a great time to pause and ask for clarifying questions.
Thank you so much, Kim. I'll give folks to gather their thoughts and their questions. I appreciate the attention to detail and, of course, the piece of making sure all our indicators are complete with this addition of the alt LPAC, just like you worked on the alt CASP assessment. So we will start with Shalini. Go ahead. You can ask the first question.
Thank you. Yeah, so my first question is really around the looking at the cut score. So just to clarify, will you also be looking at the cut scores of the status, right? Will these same groups be looking at the status cut scores, or just you're just planning on having them look at the change cut scores for the LP?
So for the LP, as was shared in the slides, the state board did approve in 2019 the status cut scores. So at this time, there's no need for approval for the status cut scores. They were approved in 2019. And therefore, this year, we will be approving the change cut scores with the state board, as well as the color grid for the LP.
So I just want to say, I feel like it's a missed opportunity. I appreciate that they were approved in 2019. I think just like with the academic indicators, right? A few years after they were approved, the state board went back and looked at whether those cut scores were appropriate and made adjustments, right? I think that it might be, and I know COVID has made things very weird because we have some missing years, and you can see from this year's results, right, that there's many more students are struggling. But I do think it's important to go back and look at those status cut scores and the impact that it's having on the field, right? And the reason I say that is because if you look at, and I know Babatunde earlier talked about like the levels of cut scores, I think, and I'll just speak as a school board member, right? So when we get a color on the dashboard, and we see, for example, that we're yellow with the LP, and that really means that less than half of our students are making that normative progress with the LP, right? Because under the current status, right? It's sending a signal to my school district, oh, you're doing okay with English learners, right? And so then maybe the district we don't, as a district, don't focus on English language progress. Although I would say as an individual, if less than half my kids were making the expected progress in a year, then I would be very, very concerned, right? And as a board member, I'd be very concerned. And so I worry that the cut scores that we have with the status are sending that wrong message to districts, right? And so I would just urge the CDE, your work plan, to consider looking both at the status and the cut scores. Does that make sense?
Thank you for that feedback. Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. With that, Babatunde, you're next.
Yes, thank you. And, I'd like to echo what Shilani just shared. I think that when we look at the one indicator out of all the indicators on the California dashboard, the LP is the one that's actually looking at individual student growth, which is really good. That's a very good thing. However, when we look at the cut points and, very low is below 35%, and then very high is 65% and above. And there's only, less than 5% of districts across the state that hit that very low. 29 total, I think it was, in the MOU, 29 total districts at a 600 plus. I feel like that, I really agree with Shilani's comments around recommending that the work group also look at status. It's probably good timing as well to kind of just re-look at that and do additional analysis to see, especially if we're going to, look at change cut points on top of that. Because if the status results should be adjusted, we should consider that. And so I would just recommend that to be re-looked at a minimum.
Thank you, Babatunde. Let me see if there's any other questions for this part of the presentation. Okay, with that, go ahead, continue on, Kim.
All right. So with that, I will walk through updates for the revisions to the state indicators. So we have two indicators again that we're looking at those revisions. I will stop between each of them for those questions as well and clarifying. So first up, we have the graduation rate indicator. And again, I feel like Judy set us up for this conversation today. Since 2017, the graduation rate calculation has varied every year for both traditional, non-DAS, and DAS schools. And specifically, we've utilized 3 different rates at the school level over 4 different dashboards. So that has been either the 4-year cohort rate, a 4 or 5-year combination rate, which Cindy walked you through right on the dashboard, that we can see that utilization and difference there. And then additionally, we had a 1-year graduation rate. which was a modified method for our DAS schools that we developed. So for traditional or non-DAS school graduation rates on the dashboard, you can see that we utilized a 4-year cohort rate for the dashboards on 2017 and 2018. And P.S., if you go back to 2017 and 2018, that's the rate you're going to see reflected there. We do not go back and revise previous dashboards with the latest, greatest thing. So that's what you would see when you were looking through the dashboard that year. However, in 2019, we were able to incorporate our 4-5 combination rate, which was a really great step in the progress of this an evolution of our rate to be able to recognize, as you saw from Cindy, right, that there are significant numbers of students who are achieving and taking that additional year. So being able to recognize those students within our graduation rate is a great step forward to, again, share the work that's happening at our school level and what's going on. So that rate was reflected for traditional or non-DAS schools for the 2019 and the 2022 dashboard. However, for DAS schools, in 2017, fun fact, DAS schools were not on the dashboard. And that was specifically because the state board had asked us, to look at how we would incorporate and properly and validly measure DAS school performance. So they were not a part of our 2017 accountability system. However, in 2018, we were able to debut our modified method 1-year graduation rate, and that was also available in 2019 for those DAS schools. However, the Department of Education informed us last August that our use of a 1-year graduation rate was not available for any longer. We could not use modified methods, and therefore we needed to have the same graduation rate for all schools in order to measure them properly. Therefore, on the 2022 dashboard, you see all DAS schools receiving a 4-5-year combination rate, meaning that every graduation rate on the dashboard in 2022 is universally the same measurement. And I walked through, that again, July 27th, it felt more like August to me, I guess. Go through the memories of summer. However, that waiver, the full denial of the waiver really left us with no options to pursue in the immediate future for the DAS program for the 2022 dashboard based on the time of that notification. And specifically, the reason was that utilization of a 1-year graduation rate didn't sufficiently demonstrate how the request would advance student academic achievement. And that's a fun way of saying that, good idea, but Congress didn't want you to do that. So moving forward, we're going to look and see what we could do for our DAS schools because we do truly value their contributions. We want to make sure we can accurately measure what's going on in the DAS schools. And so therefore, that's what we're walking through and our plan to do this year. Next slide. So CDE has approved a long-term, and with SBE, approved recommendations to work on developing long-term options to help support these DAS schools that in 2022, right, have a very different graduation rate than their prior 2 years in 2018 and 2019. Specifically, they gave us a hint and they said that we could propose to incorporate multiple extended year adjusted cohort graduation rates in order to give schools credit where they are receiving a regular high school diploma in 6 or more years. And with that direction and that nudge forward, we are going to take them up on that offer and move that into our work plan this year. Now, specifically, looking in 2022 and the results that Cindy shared with you, the use of the 4-5 combination rate was used to determine CSI, comprehensive support and improvement, and ATSI, additional targeted support and improvement for the 2022-23 year. And this significantly increased the number of DAS schools determined for eligibility for comprehensive support based on the comprehensive support graduation rate criterion. And I'll show you on that on the next slide. So in 2020, so based on the 2019 dashboard, we had 236 DAS schools eligible for CSI. In 2021-22, that went down to 151. And then this year, we're up to 293. That is a significant number of our DAS schools and our DAS high schools in the state that are, as we know, based on how we developed the one-year graduation rate, doing great work and doing great things. And through the emails that I've received, multiple just this week, walking through, they're taking on students whose cohort has passed, right? They're taking on students whose opportunity to capture graduation within the cohort rate, even for the 5-year rate, right? It's gone, but they are taking these students on and moving them forward and working with them to graduate. So how can we be, possibly capture them and reward these schools for the work that they're doing? So therefore, our graduation rate work plan for 2023 is to review and analyze with our educational partners and work groups some options and methodologies to calculate what a multiple extended year rate looks like, and particular attention to how this multiple extended year rate would affect DAS schools. While it would be applied to all schools in general, obviously the intended outcome of this new rate would be specifically to provide an advantage to these DAS schools and capture the work that they are doing on their campuses. So with that, I will pause and see if there's any questions around the graduation rate work plan.
Thank you so much, Kim. I really appreciate the table that was in there. And just as a reminder for CPAG members, when we pause, it's just for clarifying questions. At the end of the entire item, we'll go to public comment. We'll listen to the folks that have public comment, and then we can come back together for CPAG discussion. So just to remind folks, this is time for clarifying questions. We'll have robust CPAG discussion after the public comment as well. Okay, Kim, go ahead. Keep going.
All right. I'm ready for comments later. All right. And then the other indicator, very closely linked to the graduation rate indicator that we'll be providing suggested modifications and updates to is our ever-evolving college/career indicator. So as you saw and as Cindy shared, the CCI was not published in 2022 on the dashboard, and I hope it was nice and clear. We tried our best to add a very clear language, right, that so people didn't mistake it for not having a CCI, right? So I hope that was helpful this year. But we did not publish the CCI because in 2021, the statewide summative assessments may not have been the most viable option for some LEAs due to COVID-19, and that criteria takes up a lot of the prepared criterion for the CCI. So we didn't think that was a valid or fair option for any of those LEAs that did not administer the CASP in 2021 due to statewide flexibilities. So therefore, we will be using the 2021-22 Smarter Balance CASP data that will influence our ability and our capacity to report the 2023 dashboard and the CCI on next year's dashboard. And just as a heads up, we have the wonderful, all of our status graphics this year have set us moving forward in case we do encounter any of these additional hiccups in the future. So CCI will be a status only indicator. We're not going to, we don't have 2 years of data to move it forward to be color already. But in 2024, it will have both status change and a performance level of red, orange, yellow, green, or blue. So this is a quick overview, and then I'm going to walk through each of these things in detail. So our work plan for 2023 is to analyze and validate data for 4 new career measures, to explore some modifications to current CCI measures, as well as establishing data collection guidelines for 2 additional CCI measures. And all of this work will be shared and reviewed with our CCI work group, our alternative schools task force, our technical design group, and CPAG in August for feedback. So first of all, the 4 new career measures. We will have been, since 2019 and 2020, gathering a lot of data from LEAs. And this is probably one of the most frequently asked questions we get, is because folks don't know that we're just still gathering the data, but it's not being utilized or incorporated into the accountability system as of yet, or it hasn't been determined, if we will, at all. And that information is based on 4 new career measures that the state board asked us to explore. And those are internships, student-led enterprise, simulated work-based learning, as well as the Armed Services Vocational Aptitude Battery Test, ASVAB, and the AFQT score. So that is all information that we have been gathering from LEAs over the past few years in order to determine whether or not this could be incorporated into the CCI. So we will be asking and seeking recommendation on these 4 measures from our educational partners to determine specifically if this data is valid and or these measures are valid to be included in the CCI. Additionally, if that choice is yes, they are valid, we would like to move forward with incorporating this somehow as a component of the CCI. We would then go into looking at the criteria that would make for prepared or approaching prepared, and what that criteria looks like for graduates with the CCI. Additionally, we are also going to be exploring adjustments to the current measures. And based on feedback over the past couple of years without accountability, the CDE has been engaging in conversations with educational partners about the current SBE approved career measures for the CCI. And so some potential questions to discuss over this year include the expansion of work-based learning activities within schools and how those should be measured, as well as the impacts of implementing work-based learning activities during the COVID-19 pandemic and what schools are able to currently offer and move forward with. So that will all be about clarity to the field and providing guidance around those particular components of the CCI. And then finally, as I said, those first 4 career measures that we're looking at to see, is this data valid and can we move forward with it? The key component of all of this is that we have robust information around a lot of things, but there are many things that CDE does not formally collect from LEAs. And in order to do so, we need to set up a data collection mechanism for that. It's either through CalPads or establishing, like we have for ASVAB, a completely separate data collection, which LEAs would then submit our data to. Currently, there's been a lot of enthusiasm around looking at civic engagement as well as industry certifications. However, the state has absolutely no mechanism currently to collect this information. So we would need to be able to develop that mechanism for collection prior to our ability to evaluate whether or not we could include them into the dashboard. So specifically for civic engagement, we would need to determine what we're collecting and how we're collecting that data. And we would hope that we might be able to do that by the end of the 2022-23 school year, depending on probably the what and the how exactly, and the parameters around that. And then additionally, for industry certifications, we really want to continue the conversation and development with our educational partners and work groups as to how this looks and in what format this would take. So those are the conversations that we'll be continuing through with this year. And with that, I'd like to pause for any questions around our college career indicator.
Thank you, Kim. CPAG members, if you have any clarifying questions. Roddy, go ahead.
Thank you, Kimberly. Appreciate this. Just a clarifying question or curious about the addition of additional indicators. It looks like we're introducing about 6 new indicators to the CCI, and this has been one of those measures that continues to evolve over the years. Do we anticipate that this is going to be kind of the standard in years to come, that we continue to add to this list and it grows as we develop, I don't know, a comprehensive sense of what CCI is, or is there going to be a cap, or where are we going with CCI, I guess?
I'd actually love for Cindy to hop in and help with this, to help respond to this.
Absolutely. I think it's a great question. Let me just clarify the verbiage that you're using. We're not adding 6 new indicators. We're adding 6 new metrics to it, because an indicator means that we would have, of course, a standalone color piece. But the board has asked us, President Darlene Hammond has asked us to come to them in May to do a study session. And I think we're at a great point of reflection. It's been since 2019 that we've looked at the indicator. We looked at what it's trying to become, and I'm in the same position as you. I'm a bit maybe worried is the wrong word, but concerned that we are headed in a direction that may be untenable. It is the largest indicator that we have to produce, with multiple data points, some that are collected, as Kimberly mentioned, through our student level data system, others that we're getting from test publishers and separate collections. And so we intend to spend May reflecting with the board about this very issue.
Appreciate that. And one follow-up, are we seeing any disproportionate influence from within these measures towards the CCI? Because it seems like there are some that, seal of biliteracy or the ASVAB, maybe a lot fewer in terms of its effect compared to A through G or CASP.
Yeah, so I think that's a great question as well. And we do intend to put out the metrics report for 2022. We've heard from the field, they've changed programs, they've changed course offerings in response to what the College Career Indicator is indicated that we see as a richness of offerings from school districts. So to your point about ASVAB, we had a very lackluster collection the last time we did that. I think less than, and Kim, please correct me if I'm wrong, but less than 1,000 students reported rather by LEAs. And so, so what is the biggest bang for your buck in this regard? And what is it trying to become, really? And so I think that's not only a philosophical conversation, but also could be a very enriching conversation to see if we need to take a pivot or take a step back from this path that we're on.
Thank you so much, Cindy. Thank you, Roddy, for the question. I'm going to go ahead, Judy.
Okay, a couple of questions. First off, is there a plan to add the blue status? I'm assuming it would be called well prepared for the College and Career Indicator at some point.
So I think, Judy, that goes back to the point I was just making about the board's study session. We don't have a clear path forward from the board at this point, and are very interested in engaging with them. What does that exactly mean? Because right now there is a blue, but I think you're talking about sort of that super level of college and career as opposed to college career. And I don't want to open the floodgates for that, but just sure. Absolutely, yes.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. Because right now, if I recall, green is the highest level that you can attain on CCI, or am I incorrect?
No, you're incorrect. We did do cut scores for all 5 colors. What the board had, talked about originally, and again, there was for those of you that are interested, I'm sure it's on the YouTube channel or however the board archives their materials, about a 3-hour study session back in 2019. And when the board originally adopted the measure, what was it, 2018, I want to say, this aspirational level 4, but we definitely had to set cut scores based on the criteria that I've mentioned for the other academic indicators, LP and such.
Okay, thank you for that. The other question I had was really tied in with the previous question. Part of my question is around thinking through CCI indicators that are accessible for those who are in DAS programs or court and community schools, and how do we make sure that they still have ways in which to achieve being up at the prepared status when all these other indicators that many of which they would not have access to due to the length of time they may be in a program to be able to complete.
And I'm sorry, Judy, was that just amusing, or I didn't.
No, so has there been,
okay.
Yeah, has there been consideration for indicators, that DAS programs really have the ability to access and complete?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We actually have a separate work group that just focuses on DAS that has helped us. And we've been partnering with the Gardner Center at Stanford University with Dr. Jorge Ruiz de Velasco on this as well. And so, part of it is first learning, an educational piece for department staff, and then trying to tease out those metrics to see if they can be collected at the student level. So we, and maybe it doesn't show up in these slides, but we do have, and I think, Kim, that's a good reminder for May, especially when we do the deep dive into CCI, is to talk about that we did take this path on really trying to build up metrics that would really, we knew were used by DAS schools, member Flora. So just, yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, let me see if there are any other questions. Okay, with that, we are going to take a 10-minute break. We will come back together. It's 10:47, so let's come back together at 10:57 and stretch your legs, take care of your needs, and just to let CPAG members know, we're about halfway through our item. So we come back together, we'll continue listening and learning with Cindy and Kim, continue pausing for clarifying questions, and then at the end of the item, we'll go to public comment and then CPAG discussion. So see you back in 10 minutes. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming back from break. I hope you had a quick walk, a nice drink, and maybe you have some snacks with you now, like I do. I think we need a roll call to establish a quorum again. Am I right, Will?
Yes, you are, Melanie. You ready?
All right. I'm going to toss it to you, Will, for a roll call. Sorry, I blanked. Roll call.
Well, no worries. You're excited about those snacks. We got you. All right. Melanie Green.
Here.
Judy Flores.
Here.
Ronald Anaya.
Here.
Bootsy Battle Holt. Diane Grotjohn. Serena Small. Janelle Woodward.
Here.
Mia Cooper.
Here.
Hadi Boonchoy.
Here.
Shilonine Cruz Gonzalez.
Here.
Abatunde Ilori.
Here.
Gabriella Tavidian.
Here.
Amy Wynn Hernandez.
Here.
Todd Collins.
Here.
Kelsey Krausen.
Here.
Samara Palco.
Here.
All right, great. Thank you, team. Melanie, we do have quorum.
Awesome. Thank you, Will. Okay, Kim, back to you.
Actually, it's back to
me.
Cindy.
Oh, back to you, Cindy.
Yeah, Melanie, I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to bring us to the home stretch. So let me just make sure I've got this. Are you seeing this in the presenter or the correct mode?
Yeah, it looks good. Presentation mode.
Thank you very much. All right, so additional accountability work. We do have a couple of other things that we are working on beyond the existing state indicators. And the first one that I want to cover is science data and the dashboard. So we've grouped the next couple of together, so they'll make sense as I walk through them. So as way of background, the first California science test, or as we refer to it in the department as CAST, was administered to students in grades, was first administered in 2018. And of course, this test is limited to grades 5, 8, and once in high school. In 2020, the State Board of Education first started talking about the timeline for potential incorporation of the science results into the dashboard. And then less than a week later, because I remember that presentation very well, of course, we went into COVID lockdown and students not being present physically in schools. So fast forward to 2020, we did provide at the last March board meeting when we did our work plan to the state board. We provided an update on the feasibility of these results and incorporating them into the dashboard and considerations that they should be aware of. There was also information provided through our partners in our assessments division about the revised blueprints, and specifically how it would be helpful to have really the administrations that were occurring post-COVID to help set this indicator up for inclusion through on the accountability side for the dashboard as opposed to just informational. So really where we landed in September, and I think that my recollection was back in August, we did ask for your feedback on this, was informationally making sure we had a landing page for the dashboard additional reports for the science assessments. We've also since then put together a flyer that is available, I believe, on our dashboard toolkit around the science assessments. And so really trying to elevate that we are giving this assessment, that it is expected that schools and districts, of course, have this as an area of focus as required, and then talking about student outcomes. So as far as the actual assessments and looking at just this past year, the 2020-21 administration was really the first full year that we had a significant portion of eligible students taking the assessment. Specifically, nearly 92% of eligible students took the CAST. And on the alternative assessment for CAST, 72.8 or nearly 73% of students completed the CAST. So just as far as what kind of scores we have and making sure that we have appropriate data or actionable data to think about things beyond just including a link. So specifically, our science work plan for 2023, we are looking at sort of revisiting or continuing what we've done in 2022. So I've already talked about the fact that we do have the science results available through the additional reports page. We are looking at continuing this in 2023 in anticipation of getting that second full set of data for CAST results. And in 2023-24, being able to evaluate the inclusion of science into the dashboard. I don't have a preconceived notion about how it's going to go on the dashboard, whether it's a separate indicator, whether it's included as part of the existing academic indicator, or some other kind of hybrid. That is something that the board will need to provide guidance on as we move forward and again, have actionable data. The other one that is a link, and I just, or rather development, so I'm not sure, Chair Green, if you want me to pause here.
I think you can keep going. I don't see any hands.
Okay. All right. So the next piece, again, we're waiting for data on. That's how I would really cluster these together, is around our academic student level growth model. And this is an area that Kim far exceeds my knowledge. So please, Kim, if I miss something in this description, please jump in. But this is something, while it says we've been working on since 2017, we've probably been working on more like since 2007 or 2010. Many of my predecessors had fits and starts around this, but truly thinking about the board's role more recently during the development of the California School Dashboard and the accountability system, there has been a strong interest in really developing out a student level growth model. And so the criteria for selecting what growth model we should use began back in January of 2017. We have been updating the board, I think, practically every year since then on this progress. So in 2018, we spent quite a bit of time, and the board landed at a place where they directed the department to further explore the residual gain model for inclusion in the dashboard. Fast forward to the year after COVID began in May 2021, and the EBLIP model, or weighted average methodology for measuring growth, was approved. And then fast forwarding to fall of 2024, we will, at that point in time, have enough years of consecutive data to start releasing our first set of student level growth model scores, rather based on the Smarter Balance scores from those years that you can see below. And so our focus for this year is gearing up for that work in 2024, and it's really spending time on how can we just visually display this? What does it mean to have a growth model? How can it leverage the work that's already done in CASP? And so we, with our educational partners, as well as our testing contractor, Educational Testing Services, they are engaging with a series of focus groups on these various graphic displays that would meet the needs of various audiences in 2023, and we'll be bringing that to the board. And so that is really what's on our radar for the growth model. So continuing ahead to, again, I would group this around information that we've put in prior dashboards around, but rather the 2022 dashboard is the priority one, the teacher assignment data. And specifically, for the first time, because of the release of the teacher assignment monitoring outcomes reports, the department was able to include, for information purposes, on the 2022 dashboard, a link to that data set. We supported the release of the data with a specialized flyer. We also engaged an ad hoc work group. And so just to be aware, this is a self-reflection tool that is used for that indicator right now at this time. Senate Bill 75 that was passed pre-COVID in 2019 did direct the department and the board to that the standards for local indicators for which the department collects or otherwise has access to relevant data, so that we're collecting at a student level or that we can apply statewide, that we need to look at, to the extent practicable, be based on objective criteria. So we are engaging that ad hoc work group to establish those objective criteria this coming year. And again, the language is, I'm not sure if it's taken verbatim, but it's close enough on this last bullet. So keeping in mind that these objective criteria may include, but are not necessarily limited to, the extent of disparities across school sites within a school district or county office, or performance relative to statewide data. So really the only metric when we look at local indicators that meets this criteria is that teacher assignment data. And so just want to make sure that, I make a comment that is one part of the three parts of the first of priority one indicator. And so for us moving forward, we are planning on, once the second year of data is available, that we develop these objective criteria with the assistance of that work group, and that we gather feedback for reporting information and resources for the 2023 dashboard. And so that is something that we are working on in collaboration with our program partners and many educational partners. And then the final piece of that I think after this, maybe we could just take a brief pause, or I'll defer to you, Chair Green, if you want to pause now.
No, Cindy, you think just covering this and then pause for clarifying questions? Okay.
So this last piece is, again, around a piece of legislation that relates to the least restrictive environment requirements. And so specifically, we've quoted Ed Code section here that requires the department by November of this year, November 30th specifically, that we publish data related to federal measures on least restrictive environment for pupils with disabilities on our internet website, and that we link or include it as a resource through the dashboard. And so the data needs to be disaggregated by race or ethnicity and local educational agency. So we are looking at data that LEAs have been submitting to the department through CalPADS for a period of time. They do submit this data to us. We will link it from our website to the dashboard. And so it'll operate similar to what I just described for priority one for this past year. And so again, as we get in a space where we can bring this back to you and get input on where best to put the link to least restrictive environment, since of course that only relates to one student group area, which is our students with disabilities, although the disaggregation will be by race and ethnicity. It is not incorporated in as a metric for measurement on the dashboard, more so for informational purposes and to elevate, I think, this issue around students with disabilities and least restrictive environment.
Thank you so much, Cindy. So CPAG members, I'll give you a chance to collect any clarifying questions you have. And just raise your hand and I'll call on you in the order that I see them. Cindy, I just have one question on the least restrictive environment. This data would be coming from SACE?
Well, SACE now feeds into CalPAD, so I don't call it SACE, Melanie, but of course, most of our districts are using SACE, which of course is a San Joaquin product, but it's coming from CalPADs.
Okay, just wanted to make sure the department does a great job of always helping LEAs know where the data comes from. I think you iterated this earlier, all the data we have access to, also in real time, always, looking at your dashboard and then saying, okay, what does current attendance look like? So I just appreciate you all always paying attention to that, where the data comes from. So let me just check CPAG members. Roddy, go ahead.
Yeah, just a quick clarifying question. I heard the least restrictive was for information purposes only. So just to confirm, is that science and teacher assignment also going to be information, or are these factored towards differentiated assistance or any other interventions?
I think that's the $1 million question, is how and whether to incorporate them. It doesn't, the language doesn't specify, for example, on priority one in the teacher assignment data that it needs to be, it doesn't elevate itself to a state indicator, but as a local indicator, how will it feed into differentiated assistance? And that's not yet been determined. For science, I would say even a step back from that. There needs to be definitely a conversation and direction from the board on next steps.
Thank you, Cindy. Go ahead, Sheelani.
Hi, and I apologize earlier for making comments. I forgot about process. I have a question about this least restrictive environment piece and the last data point about how the data should be disaggregated by race or ethnicity. And so I have a question about just in terms of if it becomes visualized on the dashboard, right? And it doesn't require disaggregation by language status or by socioeconomic status. So what happens with that kind of data where would you then disaggregate it by all of those and make it visible on the dashboard, or you would just do it by what's required by statute?
So let me clarify. This will not be a report on the dashboard. It'll be a link from the dashboard to the department's website. So that's what this language is saying, right? It says with disabilities on its internet website and shall include it as a resource.
Okay, I get it. So it'll be a link to either a CD page or to DataQuest.
Correct.
Okay. And then, so just for my understanding then, so when you actually go to that website, let's say it's would it be on a separate website probably, or would it be within DataQuest?
I think that's what we're trying to determine. The other thing that I'm very aware of, and if my colleagues from special education were here, is we're very aware of the small cell size issue and the need to suppress if we have less than, for us, it's less than 10 students. And so, that's why I think the language is saying local educational agency as opposed to school or student group, is that we're going to quickly move into issues around small cell sizes with our program student groups. So again, that's something that hasn't yet been determined, but the language at a minimum has to be, or the report at a minimum has to be race or ethnicity.
And so I guess that's really then my last question is really about when decisions are made about what ends up being disaggregated, right? Because this only calls out race or ethnicity. Would there be a discussion about disaggregating by all the other student groups that we're used to seeing, right, on many metrics?
Yeah. So for us, we're starting at the point of what the requirement is in legislation, and so that is the department's obligation, is to meet its requirements under education code. That's the minimum.
Okay, let me see if there's any other hands. Thank you, Sheilani, for your questions. Okay, Cindy, I think we're good to keep moving.
Okay, so the last chunk is just one more slide, and then we'll talk about next steps for the state board. So around business rule changes, and I think we've sort of tried to change the language to make this be a bit more user-friendly. We're looking at alignment of our indicators. And so we are also planning for 2023 to look at business rules that may affect or change the status or overall performance levels for state indicators. So there are three areas of interest that we have seen sort of inconsistent application. The first is our English learner progress indicator, the participation rate. We have a different standard for LP than we do for our academic indicator. Just reflecting with the work group, with you later on once we've done the work behind it to bring forward to the board for a decision this fall. So that is one area that we are looking at. The other is we do continue to have districts. Thank goodness it tends to be less than two hands full, but sometimes it's two hands and your feet of districts that actually do not certify data in CalPADS. And we cannot, it is our practice to not extract data that has not been certified. And so when we don't have data that we can use to evaluate schools or district or student progress, it makes our job very difficult to see if they're eligible for differentiated assistance, or see, to Member Flores' point, if they should be a model best practice. And so the data certification piece is important for us to seek clarification from the board on how they want to apply that uniformly. And the last piece is there is on occasion, I already mentioned an instance of this with chronic absenteeism, where we get a call after the fact, after the data has been released, from a district who says, we gave you bad data. We don't have no students who are chronically absent. We actually have a handful, or we have enough that would get us to potentially be identified for differentiated assistance. So there has been a practice, once we're made aware of that we definitely would put on data quests that the district or school has told us that their results may not be accurate, and you need to contact the district for the information that is accurate. There is not the capacity, once we put out the dashboard, to go back and redo things. It's really important that districts give us accurate data the first time around. And for example, for this collection, districts have upwards of 4 to 5 months to certify these data. So it's not like we rush them for a 2-week period. This is a really long, extended period of time that they have to submit data. And so again, for each of these components, we're looking at alignment and doing some reflection to make sure that we're really reflecting on overall policies that are universal between these pieces. But these are it doesn't have a sexy name, but it's business rule changes for 2023. And so just wanted to again bring those to your attention. And maybe you've been at a school district or a school site who's encountered that issue and had to have that designation, or a designation of very low or rather low on their dashboard in lieu of actual results because of one of these situations. So with that, Melanie, I have 2 slides just to talk about next steps for the state board, and we can close this out for public comment unless you want to take any clarifying questions now.
Nope, that's perfect. Let's do the 2 slides. Then any clarifying questions come up, then like you said, public comment would be great.
Okay. So as far as next steps for the state board, we will take whatever you've given us today, whether it's feedback on cut scores or feedback on the wonderings of how is science included to the state board. It's something that we always put in the item, the reflections by CPAG members. And we are seeking from the board in March, like we have every other March, feedback on whether or not we are, touching upon the right tenor of things for 2023, knowing that 2023 is already almost a third of the way done, and we'd have to start implementing these rules and bringing them back to the board by September. And so it's a very, very quick turnaround And so, we've had a lot of initial conversations prior to even this meeting with our equity partners. Partners from county offices have viewed this presentation in one form or another this past fall. And so in some ways, hopefully we're ahead of the game, but again, welcome your feedback on anything that you see that we can improve on or we may be missing. And then looking ahead to September, and so your August meeting will be key in this. As always, we will hopefully have simulations done, our policy work group, our technical work group meetings completed, up to which I think we have, I don't even know how many dozens of meetings we have planned ahead. I know it's a lot, but to bring to the board for approval, again, with taking this to CPAG first in August, the metrics that are listed on this slide.
Thank you so much, Cindy. CPAG members, any clarifying questions before we open it up for public comment? And then after we have public comment, we'll be able to have CPAG discussion. Let me check. Okay, seeing no questions from CPAG members at this point, we will open up the phone line.
Melanie,
Sorry. Go ahead, Babatunde. Sorry, go ahead.
I put my hand up this time. Thank you.
Sorry, no, that's perfect. Go ahead.
Just a clarifying question, and it's regarding CSI designation for schools. I know it was talked about earlier. I was curious for the alternative high schools that do not have a high enough N size to generate an indicator, but for whatever reason they were identified as CSI. Is there any technical guidance around how that works, where a school that doesn't have like the N size to generate an indicator falls under CSI? I was just curious if there was any technical guidance around that.
So, okay, I want to make sure I wasn't off of mute. Go ahead, Kim.
I was going to say, so I believe this year there was an instance of one school, am I correct, that had no indicators on the dashboard and was identified for CSI. And so we have the guidance and rules around that as part of our technical information around that. But this year there was only one of those schools identified.
And Kim, it is in the memo, in the original memo and the updated memo in attachment 1, page 2 of 4. There's actually a small school methodology.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Babatunde. Let me check. Any other clarifying questions? Okay, with that, we will open up the phone line for public comment. Members of the public wishing to provide comment on this item may do so by calling the number on the slide. You will be notified when it is your time to speak. We encourage you to please state your name and affiliation for the record. Please remember to turn down the speaker volume of your computers if you are following the live feed. Speakers will be limited to 1 minute each.
Thank you, Melanie. We'll start the public call-in right now. I see caller with the phone number ending in 5116. You're unmuted. Your 1 minute starts now.
Good morning, Jessica Sacco on behalf of Children Now. I refer you to the letter sent in by the LCFF Equity Coalition for my complete comments. I would like to highlight a couple of items that have risen to the top during the course of today's comprehensive and informative presentation. And particularly, I would like to thank department and state board staff for their ongoing engagement with the equity community. Firstly, the status levels of the LP must be revisited. The current standard of only 65% of students making a year's worth of progress as being a high performance level is inappropriate. Secondly, school climate surveys should be a part of the accountability work plan. Just last month, the State Board of Education had a robust conversation about the use of school climate surveys in our accountability system and concluded with asking staff to provide additional information on the topic. Therefore, we urge school climate surveys to be called out in the 2023 work plan. Finally, relative to the growth model, I encourage the setting of a deadline for incorporating a student growth model in our accountability system.
Your time is
California is one of only 2 states in the country without a growth model. Thank you, and I look forward to the work to come.
Thank you. I see caller with the phone number ending in 5596. You're unmuted. Your time starts now.
Good morning. This is Liz Guillen with Public Advocates, also a member of the LCFF Equity Coalition. I also want to highlight the coalition's comments around the English Learner Performance Progress Indicator, the ELPI. It does need higher expectations, and it should be part of the work plan, not just the change. It would be a timely opportunity as the governor's proposed budget seeks to use the full power of LCFF by shining greater light into the needs of specific student groups for our planning and resource allocation. A higher status cut score for LP will serve to identify the real needs of English learner students. In addition, the department's work plan should include revisiting the school climate surveys, as Ms. Sacco testified to earlier. The board did express an interest in addressing the points around standardizing survey items for the different surveys used and asking LEAs to report results by student groups.
Your time is
I
up.
also want to appreciate the department. Thank you very much for that.
I see caller with phone number ending in 4301. You're unmuted. Your 1 minute starts now.
Good morning, Lindsay Tornatore calling on behalf of the California County Superintendents. First, congratulations to the new CPAG members on your appointments. We appreciate your service. Thank you, Cindy, Kim, and team for the comprehensive presentation today and all of your efforts to share the 2023 work plan far before the State Board will take action this fall. In listening to the conversation this morning, just want to acknowledge the CD's attention to the grad rate indicator, particularly as it pertains to our DAS schools. And in addition to exploration of multiple extended year grad rates, we would like to advocate for revisiting the DA eligibility criteria for county offices. We appreciated the comprehensive WestEd evaluation of differentiated assistance and strongly support the researchers' recommendation to revisit this criteria, noting the fact that charters have different criteria sets a precedent for county offices. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I see caller with phone number ending in 8945. You're unmuted. Your time starts now.
Hi, this is Suzanne Cooey from the Charter Schools Development Center, and likewise want to thank the Department of Education for all the great work on the dashboard. It's got a ton of great information, but on LB, just want to chime in. This is not really necessarily a comment that benefits or doesn't benefit charter schools, but I think for the sake of a more meaningful metric and to support continuous improvement, LP really means a different thing at the elementary levels than it does at the secondary levels. And so just like we've done for the academic indicator, where the cut points are different for high school, or for DAS, where we acknowledge that those schools are taking in a different population, then it becomes more meaningful to set the cut scores relative to the population being served. And I just think oftentimes we're seeing these sort of one-size metrics fits all that we're using to do all kinds of different things. And we want it to be a better evaluative information. Thanks so much.
Caller with phone number ending in 4369. You're unmuted. Your time starts now.
Hello, my name is Sally Fox, and I'm a retired multilingual educator in San Diego and a policy analyst for CABE, the California Association for Bilingual Education, founded in 1974 and part of the LCFF Equity Coalition. We'd like to express our gratitude for all this work on behalf of all our California public school students in their extraordinary social, historical, cultural, geographic, economic, and of course, linguistic diversity. The data dashboard is a powerful tool with tremendous potential to improve our educational system. As our LCFF coalition letter stated last week, we applaud the excellent work thus far, and we continue to urge consideration of the letter's 3 bullet points, specifically to revisit the LP performance levels for status, add the growth model to the dashboard, and strengthen the school climate surveys with select standardized items. Thank you for the opportunity to share this feedback on behalf of California's multilingual learners, their families, and educators.
Thank you. And that concludes our public comment.
Great. Thank you so much, Art. Okay, now that we have concluded public comment, we will open for CPAG member discussion. CPAG members, same as we did it throughout the meeting for clarifying questions, you can raise your hand or let me know if I don't see your hand, and we will commence with discussion. So let me see if anyone has some initial thoughts to start. Judy, go ahead.
Well, first off, I just want to thank Cindy and Kimberly for such a great comprehensive presentation. It's helpful to frame conversation with that as the context. So thank you for that. In listening both to the public comment as well as to comments made by, or questions really raised by members of this group, I would ask for consideration of 3 additional areas to the work plan. One is that continued focus around growth. As Cindy mentioned, work's been underway there for quite some time, and really getting to the place where we can show individual student growth over time is important. The school climate survey is definitely another area to see beyond suspension what's happening on a school campus and really seeing that more comprehensively across the state. And then, as Lindsay in her call-in identified, the unique indicators or cut scores for county programs, which are most often DAS programs, as we have for charter schools. Because, you know, when we think big picture, the 22 dashboard underscores the importance of implementing California's whole child initiatives. And we're involved in so many of those: expanded learning programs, universal meals, TK, community schools, and we continue to focus our efforts on these programs to show our commitment to serving all kids. And with the 22 dashboard providing data, we truly want to be at the forefront of accelerating student learning through high quality teaching, as well as a focus on nurturing belonging and respect and positive behavior intervention within each classroom and school. We continue to prioritize students' health, social emotional development, trauma-informed practices, and basic needs, which all have a significant impact on a child's ability to learn and grow. And I wanted to spend a moment to just talk about the chronic absenteeism data that Cindy shared earlier. As we think about the inclusion of this indicator in a year this last year when the California Department of Public Health's guidance required students to be home for quarantine even when they were not sick. According to the December 15th memo this last year, State Board memo, within the 850 districts that had more than 29 K through 8th grade students, over 71% of them were very high on the chronic absenteeism dashboard. And since 2 indicators are needed for DA eligibility, this significant increase in chronic absenteeism has become a huge factor in the increase for targeted assistance. Approximately 60% of our districts are eligible for DA. And even at the school level, as Cindy shared, we're 3/4 of the schools in the state eligible for one form of assistance. So from my perspective, as I think about the dashboard since it's been put in place, one of the things that I believe is one of the most powerful aspects is the priority placed on improvement as we see through the change component on the 5x5 dashboard. And so as we come out of the pandemic years where many students have struggled, I look forward to the improvement, those positive changes that we will see in this year's results. And I can speak to Shasta County's review of data as we've been moving through this year and see that attendance has improved over where we were in the last year. And our local assessment data continues to show positive trends above where we were in the 2021 year. because really that role of county offices within the statewide system of support is working closely with our schools and districts, providing that ongoing support, whether they're formally identified for targeted assistance or not. And so we are responding with urgency, with focus, really doubling down on improvement efforts and data support. I want to end by coming back to some of the questions that I raised around graduation rate. So county offices are responsible for leading county operated programs that primarily focus on alternative ed, regional special ed programs, and juvenile court schools, and serving California's most vulnerable and transient students. We qualify for the DAS. And yet, when we think about this idea of a 5 or now potentially more than 5-year grad rate, keep in mind that these students in DAS programs are highly transient, and they are not coming to our programs as freshmen and continuing with their cohort. They, at most, are spending 1 year within our schools. I mean, if we're out of the norm, we might have them more than one, but that really is not the reality. And so when we think about the idea of adding a 6th year, we struggle to have students even consider a 5th year. And so I would want to see the impact of a 6-year graduation rate in looking back at that work plan to really see the data in terms of what that might bring in terms of increased for DAS schools. And similar to what's taken place for students with disabilities, I'm wondering if there's been any discussion about moving the outcomes for students within DAS programs back to their district of residence or the high school they attended before the change in placement, whether we're talking about graduation rate, suspension rate, or other indicators. The 1-year graduation rate calculations have been critical in our ability to effectively communicate student progress, whether that's to students, to their parents, to our community. And so we remain, I get the fact that the federal government disallowed the modified methods, and we remain committed to working with CDE and the state board to find options to show for LCFF State Priority 5, which is really pupil engagement, how will we show progress for these most vulnerable high school students? We appreciate and know that CDE and state board are empathetic to this challenge, and that where we're at now is due to the federal requirements.
Thank you so much, Judy. So I have from the next, I'll let you know the names, but then I'll say who's next. So we have Ron, Amy, and Shilonine on deck. So Ron, go ahead, take it away.
Thanks, Melanie. Thanks to Cindy and Kimberly for the presentation today. Just giving a perspective from a site perspective, and as we and this will echo a little bit of what Judy was speaking to, but very specifically thinking about students' social emotional well-being and measurements that could potentially be on the dashboard and be reported out. I think it's great that the board continues to take a look at options where we can continue to measure and find areas for differentiated assistance for schools. I think that the social emotional measurement piece is something that I would implore the board to consider. As long as California continues to work on funding through average daily attendance, as opposed to enrollment, LEAs and sites have to make hiring decisions and budgetary decisions based on available funds, and we have to not only think about best first instruction, but also how do we provide for all the multi-tiered systems of supports for our students? How are we looking at the whole student and supporting them, not just in their education, but also in their other parts of development, from especially with mental health and with making sure that they're here on time and attending on a daily basis. with chronic absenteeism so high over the last year and still seeing higher levels than previously reported, that does hurt our funding, and it makes LEAs and sites more dependent on that differentiated assistance as part of their budget. And making decisions in hiring is a little bit more difficult. My point here really is that if we can find a way to collect data, whether it's from California Healthy Kids Survey or other data points, to be able to measure these things, where LEAs right now are partnering with third-party organizations for site-based therapy and things of that nature, to be able to identify schools that need that help and students who need that help, I think would go a long way for us to be able to support the whole student. And not just looking at college and career readiness, but also how are we supporting them developing and becoming adults.
Thank you so much, Ron.
Melanie, would it be possible to jump in for just one moment? There is a board item coming in March around this area, around social emotional health, that the board directed the department to do. And so that is the work under William McGee's leadership. And while it was not part of this agenda today, it was one of those, sort of things that we're working on as the plane is being built as it's flying kind of thing. We'll definitely make sure that, Will is on this call and he's watching this meeting, he's hosting this meeting. And so, moving forward, if you guys can be briefed on it or directed to that item when it's published. So I just want to acknowledge that it was not part of this presentation. It didn't make it in at the same time that we were putting ours together. So
I appreciate that. And I'm sorry, just one last thing. We take a look at the LCAPs coming in from LEAs and many LEAs, I can't speak to most. We see something in their LCAP about social emotional learning and supporting students that way. And so if it's that glaring of a need statewide, I think it's something that definitely should be addressed. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Amy, go ahead.
Thank you. Judy and Ron did a great job of kind of saying everything that I wanted to say. So I'll just repeat some of the information that I think is important. One, absolutely the chronic absenteeism thing. It has been really hard when in our county, there's 33 districts and 31 of the 33 districts are in differentiated assistance because of chronic absenteeism. It's not a measure that reflects what's going on in the schools. That measure is a reflection of what happened in the county, in the country, in the state with COVID. So to have that as a indicator to bring districts as a differentiated assistant district has been tough on a community that really prides ourselves in how we see what we do as a school. So that was a measure that even as a board conversation was something that they wanted us to bring up to the state level. So I'm glad that I'm able to bring that here. The other thing is that school climate, I absolutely agree with Judy. It would be great to have some information from other ways to look at school climate besides suspension, because we know that is not just what the climate looks like, but having other measures on how students feel about their sites, how the staff feels about the support they're given, all of those questions. So I would absolutely be in support of something from the CDE level that says, here's the questions that we want you to ask, and then gather that information as metrics, because I think that would be helpful as we move on to initiatives. And then the last thing I just wanted to mention was the LP participation rate. Remembering that students that take the summative assessments change because we reclassify students throughout the year. Because there isn't a drop dead deadline on when students are reclassified, sometimes that participation rate is not accurate because students could have been reclassified, and that's why they're not taking the summative, but they are not taken out of that bottom number of how many students. So just looking at that when we talk about the LP participation rate. But other than that, thank you, Kimberly and Cindy. It was a great presentation, really good information, and thank you for this committee to allow us to have our voice.
Thank you so much, Amy. Next, Sheilani, go ahead.
Thank you. And I think, like Amy, I'm just going to say some of this may be repetitive based on what some of the previous speaker said, but I do want to get my share what I'm thinking. So one, I do want to just reiterate with the LP, I hope that the work plan would include an evaluation not only of the change, but also the status cut scores. I already explained a little in detail earlier why I thought so, so I won't repeat that. In terms, I'm going to try to do it in the order that you presented. In terms of the college and career indicator, this is very tangential, but I'm just wondering in terms of the cradle to career database system and that what's existing, right? Just future thinking about like once we're able to actually connect this to like college, our whole system, like our K-12 data to like college and career actual data, right? Thinking about like how do we evaluate these indicators based on actual college and career success and not just, based on what districts are using to measure. I don't know if that makes sense, Cindy, but I just think it's, thinking about the future, I think it's important. I'm very excited about the college to career database. So and then in terms of the growth model, I do really want to urge us, I know we've been talking about a growth model for very long. We heard from public comment that we're one of the few states that does not have a growth model in their accountability system. And so I think as a local school board member, knowing that when I look at scores on the dashboard and I'm not looking at same students year after year, but I'm looking at this year's third graders versus last year's third graders, right? It doesn't make for as good decision-making in terms locally. And so really, I think it's really important for us to prioritize once that growth data is available, that we're actually using it, right? Especially if we're saying we do want a system that's continuous improvement, that we're really trying to improve what's happening in our classrooms. In terms of the science indicator, I also agree. I think I was a board member during No Child Left Behind, and I remember people trying to push to like just focus on the bubble kids on math and English, and that's it. We don't care about anybody else. And so I really appreciate the multiple measures that we've developed. And I think science is a really important piece. I think we as a state are saying that STEM is very important to our, and so I think we also need to indicate to our communities and to our districts that science is important, and it does belong in the dashboard. It does belong in accountability. In terms of the last piece, I'll just talk about sort of the teacher assignment data and the school climate survey. I'm going to speak more generally just to the local indicators, but I do think that it's really important that we find a way to make those standardized so that we can have common understanding across our districts. And I'll just use an example, not of the ones that were already mentioned, but I think it's important to look at the teacher assignment data as well as school climate, but I'll just look at the family engagement. So as a school board member, I like to keep track of what's happening out there. And so Pivot, many of you know who Pivot is, released this sort of dashboard judging districts on their readiness to be successful in schools, right? So I went and looked at it for my district at Azusa, and I was a little confused about some of the stuff. And then I noticed that one of the indicators, they were using our local indicator on family engagement, right? And so I know at Azusa, we're part of the community engagement initiative. I know what other districts do. I know that what we're doing is like heads above what many other districts, but as a district, we're very honest and we feel like we're still emerging, right? And we're still working, we still have a lot of work to do. And so we end up getting tagged publicly because we don't say like, oh, we're excellent on this local indicator. Yes, we met it, right? Like externally, people are like thinking, oh, you need a lot of work. But maybe our neighbor who does no outreach, right? And their idea of stakeholder input is like, let's have a meeting, and if they come up, great. If they don't, great, right? We're just going to move on. But they decide we're going to say we're great, right? What is that? I mean, there's no way for external families to really understand what that means. So I just wanted to use that as an example for just my last point about how like it's really important to move those local indicators and standardize them across the state so that we do have understanding of what that really means. So I will wrap it up there. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Shalini. Now we'll have Kelsey. Go ahead, Kelsey. And then Kelsey, after that, I see Janelle and Roddy's hand. Kelsey, go ahead.
Great, thank you. And thank you, Cindy and Kimberly, also. So I just wanted to bring up again the issue of the eligibility criteria for DA. WestEd recently conducted an evaluation of DA, and this was an issue that came up in different ways in the evaluation. One that's already been brought up around county office concerns that they may be eligible in perpetuity for differentiated assistance. So that's one area that came up. It also, I think the idea around N sizes and the distribution or concentration of student groups across the state and how that may impact potential eligibility for DA was another thing that came up. And then the alignment between the state accountability and federal accountability. We now have, given the number of districts and counties that are now eligible for DA this year and the thousands of schools eligible under our federal system. Another area that feels really important for further investigation is how the eligibility criteria between the two different accountability systems may be better aligned to each other or even integrated into one system. So that's another area that I would suggest there's some further investigation. I also want to echo comments from colleagues around the inclusion of school climate surveys, as well as the growth, being able to see growth in the dashboard. Finally, one thing that hasn't been mentioned and maybe may or may not be something you would include in a presentation like this, but I wonder about continued refinements to the dashboard to make it more accessible and transparent and easier to read. So one thing I noticed in the presentation is the toggle between a district performance and state. You see them separately rather than being able to overlay one on top of the other. So that's just a small example that makes it more difficult to compare your district's performance to that of the state. So I wonder if there's other efforts underway to continue to refine the way we're presenting data to make it as useful as possible to all of our practitioners and our partners in the state.
Thank you so much, Kelsey. Janelle, go ahead.
Thank you. I really appreciate the thoroughness of the presentation and the careful thinking, and I echo my colleagues in their comments, so I will try not to take too long in my input. I do want to just reiterate that I'm in agreement regarding being very mindful about how we use chronic absenteeism data. One thing that I have found when I visit schools is that almost every school has a sign up that says, if you're sick, stay home. And so in light of that, I do think we need to realize that there could potentially be a number of different conflicting messages that parents are getting. In addition, when we look at the data for kindergarten students, we need to keep in mind that kindergarten is still optional for students in the state of California. So perhaps there's some thought to be given to that legislation in the future if we really want to improve that metric, especially for our little ones. I do agree about including the school climate data. I think that's very important. And then I want to just tag back to what Judy said about the bright spot data and the potential for that. I'm remembering when we had the similar school rankings about 1 million years ago. And what that did for us is, yes, it did bring in an element of competition. And sometimes as a school principal at that point in time, it was healthy. Sometimes it was not. However, what it did do is that it helped me to look at my school in comparison with other schools that were demographically similar to mine and find out what best practices they were using that I might want to replicate. So I think that that was an excellent point. And with that, I close and I say thank you to the entire group.
Thank you so much. I'll throw it over to Roddy. Go ahead.
Thank you, Melanie. And I want to share my gratitude for our friends over at CDE and the state board for all your work. It's a lift and it's a lot. So thank you for this. I just have one high-level musing, and that is, well, I recently took my family to the Winchester Mansion. If you've been there in San Jose, it's this old 19th century house. They've added on rooms and so forth. And it's a unique architectural kind of phenomena, but there's also no rhyme or reason at some points of it. So I think my wonder is, particularly with the college and career indicator, as we continue to add things, what's our vision, what's our strategy so that we have a clear idea of what we mean by college and career readiness and how that's assessed. And I'd even want to telescope out a little bit with the accountability system as a whole, because we're adding more things with teacher assignments, with science, with what was the other one? Least restrictive. And so I guess what is our long-term strategy and vision for where our accountability system is going? To some degree, it feels a little bit like it's evolving in parallel with our funding system. We've all seen a slew of one-time categoricals over the past couple of years, and it feels like we're stitching things together. So although I appreciate kind of the comprehensive and well-rounded nature of the accountability system, I'm also wondering how we can articulate across the state where we're going and what we're trying to achieve over the long game with the dashboard and our accountability system. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Roddy. Next, I have Babatunde, then Gabriella. Go ahead, Babatunde.
Thank you. I just want to echo some of the points that were made by fellow CPAG members. The first one I'll start off with is the ELPI, the English Learner Progress Indicator. I already stated, the recommendation for the work group to look at the status level, not just solely the change level of the cut points, to also relook at the status level. And there was a comment by a member of the public, Suzanne. I agreed with that. That made some sense, looking at like even an elementary, maybe middle and high school cut point. That could be a potential idea as well, because I think ELA and math has something similar. The other comment, I definitely agree with the social emotional piece, and just thinking about broader than that, like some type of like a graduate profile. I know some states have done something like that. It might be something to at least potentially discuss in connection, if you will, with that, some of those social emotional aspects, along with like this idea of a graduate profile. What do we want students to be able to do when they graduate? And then definitely want to encourage the progress with the growth model. I think that's critically important, and just want to encourage that. I'm glad to hear that work is continuing to be done. And then, the chronic absenteeism, another point that was made by other fellow CPAG members. I have to agree with their points, and that's just something to look at, just because of obviously 21-22 school year, the requirements because of quarantine and COVID, but then also just the capacity of counties. I mean, frankly, the challenge now is that if everything's a priority, then nothing is. So I think that's something to wrestle with, because the counties are staffed how they're staffed. So the challenge is going to be providing that service. And really, there needs to be a way to kind of differentiate more to allow for the prioritization to be done in a meaningful manner, because I suspect right now it's going to be quite challenging for counties. And I'm not on a county, but I'm just thinking just logically. So I think that's just something to think about. No, thank you for the presentation, Cindy and team. I really appreciate it. And, that pretty much concludes my comments.
Thank you so much. I'll pass it now to Gabriella. Go ahead, Gabriella.
Hey, good morning. Well, like my colleagues, I want to just thank Cindy and Kimberly for this presentation. Having recently presented this, our dashboard to our board is very fresh in my mind. And many of the sentiments that have been said this morning regarding, it seems like we're almost being punished for having followed, the county and the Department of Health, guidelines when it was, when we were looking at absentees. Because when you look at prior to the pandemic, we were definitely, closing that gap. So just being cognizant of when we look at that chronic absenteeism as an indicator for differentiated assistance, because we were one of the districts that was, given DA for a couple of our schools. And those are schools that are with high numbers of students that are special ed, medically fragile. So, like I said, obviously we were telling, as somebody shared, if we're telling our parents, keep your students at home, if they're not feeling well. So just being, extra sensitive to that piece. because now as our teachers, are returning back and things are getting a little more normalized at the school sites, now they sort of feel like, oh no, here we have this label. So just being aware of that piece. In terms of the school climate, I also agree with my colleagues that it would be nice to have a standardized tool to do that. And because I think of how, if we look at it the long run, this would be a good metric to use, when we're writing our LCAP plans. And if that is something that's standardized across the state, it wouldn't be like, oh, they're using the CHICS data or they're using a self-created, survey. It'd be nice to sort of, if there is a standardized tool that all schools are using to measure their school climate survey, then I think that information on the LCAP when you're using to see whether you met your goal or not would be a lot more helpful. And then just my last comment in terms of, I'm excited to see science, the CAST included now in the dashboard, but I just sort of also want to I wonder if the weight of that will be the same as language arts and math, because as we do, and at every school site at the beginning of the year, we look at those two indicators to look at the growth and the progress. And I don't want it to be like, oh, let's sort of take away that shift and shift that over now to science. And will that be an indicator for determining whether a school falls into differentiated assistance or a CSI in the future as well?
Thank you so much, Gabriella. Now, Todd, go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for the thoughtful and thorough presentation, and thank you to my colleagues for all the thoughtful comments. One that will stick with me a long time is the idea that the CCI is the Winchester Mystery House of indicators, and I would go on to say that the California State Dashboard is the Winchester Mystery House of accountability systems compared to most other states. And I think as we look to add more to it, we're kind of caught in exactly the problem that you'd expect to. When you say variety, you don't want to focus on a few simple things because so many things are important and there's so much variety. There's constant pressure to continue to add more and more things. And as you add more and more things, as more and more trees are added to the forest itself becomes that much harder to see. Like it sounds like some others, my board this week met and had an item on the dashboard, and we're a very engaged board. We have a very engaged community. There were no questions at all about our dashboard. There were no lessons taken away from it. There was no sense of what it meant to us. There was no accountability impact of it for us. It was an item that was raised and dispensed with in about 5 minutes. And that will be our entire annual discussion of the dashboard for the year. And I think that's because, and I've made this point before, and Cindy's probably heard it from me more than she'd like, is I think in the absence of summative indicators that take all this data that is now in the dashboard, 13 subgroups across 6 indicators, plus local indicators, plus now, the question that a board member has to answer is, how is my district doing? Am I doing better than I did last year? And a question a parent has to answer is this school a good school? And is the other school that might be available to me better than this one for my kid? And I would argue that the dashboard is configured, and certainly the way it's developing, it's becoming harder and harder. It's not easy to answer those questions, and it's becoming harder and harder. So I'd urge you to step back and think about that, because the Winchester Mystery House, when they built it, was a great mansion in San Jose, and now is a oddity museum piece. And I would hate to see the dashboard go down that same path. Thank you.
Thank you, Todd. I don't see any other further comments, so I'll just share just a few thoughts before we go into item 3. Cindy and Kim, thank you so much for your work into the presentation. I appreciate some of those summary tables that you pulled out so that we could really digest all the different numbers and changes when it came to things like differentiated assistance. I also really appreciate your dashboard education. I was in a school board meeting last night, and we were talking about the dashboard, just not as an item as it came up, and someone said, I really miss those colorful balls on the dashboard, those pie charts. And it's just a reminder of how much education that we'll all have to continue to do to help folks understand that this is a year without status and change. And I know you all do a wonderful job of that. So it'll be exciting next year as folks then reintegrate with that idea of status and change and what that means for growth. Also just appreciate, you mentioned this at the beginning and I highlighted it, I have to, is just the dashboard as a way for folks to think about their local real-time data. So in my, the County Operated Schools and Programs in San Joaquin, we looked at the suspension data and then on the dashboard, and then we then pulled up our current real-time suspension data, right? And are looking at that through the lens of student groups, looking at that through the lens of the restorative practices work we're doing. So I just encourage folks to continue to use the dashboard and then connect it to your real-time systems, especially when we're thinking about absenteeism. I hear everyone's thoughts about chronic absenteeism. I have flashbacks to Omicron last January and February. So agree that the absenteeism data really reflects a specific point in time, but then let's look at our current absenteeism data. What are we doing now? What do we need to do differently? So just kind of appreciate that push that the dashboard does for LEAs and schools to look at their real-time current data and making sure that they have access and systems to that. And again, just huge appreciation to the CPAG members for thinking through so many different pieces of this item and providing your feedback. Great connections to each other and trying to build off and add different perspectives. Thank you. With that, we'll go into item 3, which is general public comment. Public comment is invited on any matter not included in the printed agenda. We will now open the phone line for the public comment queue. Members of the public wishing to provide comment on this item may do so by calling the number on the slide. You will be notified when it is your time to speak. Again, we encourage you to state your name and affiliation for the record. Please remember to turn down the volume on your computers if you are following the live feed. Speakers will be limited to 1 minute each.
Thanks, Melanie. We'll give it about a minute. There is no public comment.
Thank you so much, Art. Okay, that concludes the agenda item number 3, and this also concludes the February 2023 meeting of the California Practitioners Advisory Group. Thank you all for a great meeting today. I learned so much from you every time we meet, and I will adjourn today's meeting at 12:08. Thank you, and thanks to the State Board for all your support in facilitating the meeting as well.